Chapter 1. The question that waited, if you want my opinion. January in New York is a month built to make people cautious. The sky stays the color of old paste. The wind comes around corners, like it owns them, and every office looks as if someone rubbed it with a cold rag. A man can be brave in June. In January he counts his money twice and checks the lock a third time. That gray afternoon, I was in the office at the Brownstone, on West 35th Street, doing the sort of thing that keeps the lights on and my soul mildly insulted. I had a stack of letters to answer, a checkbook to balance, and a sense of grievance about it. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, conducting one of his private ceremonies. If you have never stood outside those plant rooms and listened to him talk to blossoms as if they were a jury, you have missed a particular kind of extravagance. Fritz brought coffee with the quiet precision of a man who can pour without letting you hear the pour. I had just lit a cigarette when the doorbell rang. I went to answer because that is my job, and because Wolfe would rather be indicted than interrupted. When I opened the door, I found a young woman who looked as if she had spent the day arguing with herself and had lost. She was neat in a careful way, with a plain winter coat, gloves that had seen better seasons, and eyes that kept shifting, as if the street might offer her a better idea. She held her handbag like it was a document that could ruin her. "Good afternoon," I said. "You are either lost or determined. Which?" "Determined," she said. Her voice was steady, but her fingers tightened on the strap. "I need to see Mr. Wolfe." "Most people do," I said. "Some even get to name Jenna Cross." I stood aside and let her in. The warmth of the hall hit her, and she paused like a person entering a church, not because she was reverent, but because she was wondering if she belonged. Wolfe's Brownstone does that to people. It has weight, the rugs have weight, the books have weight, even the silence has weight, because Wolfe insists on it. I guided her into the office and offered a chair. She sat on the edge of it, as if she might need to flee quickly. That is not a useful habit in our office, where the chairs are designed to keep you in place until Wolfe is finished with you. "I'll see if Mr. Wolfe will receive you," I said. Her eyes flicked toward the stairs. "Is he in?" "He is in the house," I told her. "He is usually in the house. He is also usually above it, spiritually, and sometimes physically." I went up. The air on the second floor already carried a faint trace of greenhouse warmth. At the top, the plant rooms breathed their damp, controlled heat into the hallway like a private climate. Wolfe was inside, seated, huge and intent, a pair of spectacles low on his nose, examining a blossom with the concentration. Some men reserve for court testimony. I spoke from the doorway because it is healthier. "A Miss Jenna Cross is downstairs. She says she needs to see you." Wolfe did not look up. "Does she have a body?" "Not that I saw," I said. "Just a handbag and a face like someone's conscience has been kicking her." That got his attention. Wolfe lifted his eyes, slow and heavy. "Conscience is a vulgar companion, but sometimes it brings interesting data. Very well, I will receive her." He rose with the reluctance of a man required to cooperate with gravity and descended the stairs like an emperor visiting a less favored province. When he entered the office, he took his chair behind the desk, arranged his hands, and regarded Jenna Cross as if she were a specimen. "Miss Cross," he said, "you are troubled." She swallowed. "Yes, that is not a crime," Wolfe said. "It is an inconvenience. State the cause." She looked at me first, then back to Wolfe. "It's a question, a question." Wolfe repeated, as if tasting the word. "One hopes it is a good one." "It was simple," she said quickly. "That was the problem. I work in accounts at Ridgeway Tower, Ridgeway Holdings. We do reimbursements and refunds for client accounts. A late refund went out, and it wasn't supposed to. It was approved after the cutoff." Wolfe's eyelids lowered slightly. "Define cutoff." She took a breath. "Holiday schedule, year-end reconciliation, refunds after December 30, first require 2 approvals. It is policy." "Policy," Wolfe said, and his voice made it clear he did not admire the word. "Proceed." "I saw the refund in the queue," she said. "It was flagged, and it showed approved. The amount was large enough to notice, not enormous, but enough. I meant to ask my supervisor, who approved it. Wolfe's gaze stayed fixed. And you did not. She flinched. Not then. It was the holiday rush. Everyone was tense. I told myself it was probably nothing. I waited. I waited through the week between holidays. I waited through the first week back. I kept thinking I would ask when it was quieter. I said, quieter is a myth, like a parking space in Midtown. She gave a small, nervous smile. Then it vanished. This morning, I finally asked. Wolfe's eyes sharpened. Whom? My supervisor, she said. Mason Klein. He handles the approvals. He has authority. I felt a small stir of interest, and Wolfe noticed it because Wolfe notices everything that matters. And Wolfe said. Mr. Klein answered. She nodded, and her face tightened with remembered shock. He told me to forget it. He said it was handled. He said if I wanted to keep my job, I would stop asking questions like that. Her voice had a faint tremor now, and she took a breath, as if her own words tasted bad. Wolfe's tone remained calm. That is an intemperate response to an innocent inquiry. It wasn't innocent to him, she whispered. By mid-afternoon, he was dead. That line landed in our office the way a chair lands when someone kicks it out. I stopped smiling. Wolfe did not move, but the room felt more alert, as if the lamps had brightened. I said, dead how? She looked at me, eyes wide. They found him in a locked conference room. The door was locked from inside, no forced entry. There was a chair tipped over, and his coffee spilled on the carpet. Someone said it was like he stood up fast and then fell. Wolfe's voice was soft. And you came here. I didn't know what to do, she said. The police came, everyone was in panic. I kept thinking about the refund, about the way he looked at me when he told me to forget it, like he was afraid. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Fear is frequently mistaken for anger, continue. She nodded, gripping her handbag strap. Inspector Kramer called you, I think. He told me he was going to, because the locked room is. It's strange, and the timing. I told him what I asked Mason. He said the timing was too neat. I frowned. You spoke with Kramer? Yes, she said. He told me to come here and tell Mr. Wolfe everything. He said, if anyone could see through paperwork, it would be him. Wolfe's mouth tightened in what might have been satisfaction or indigestion. Inspector Kramer is correct on rare occasions. This appears to be one, I said. What was the amount of the refund? Jenna blinked, then said it promptly, as if numbers were safer than emotions. 28,600. That is a number that can be explained, but not easily ignored. Wolfe asked, who was the client? She hesitated. The refund was to a vendor account listed as Brightwell Solutions, but the client it was charged against was a Ridgeway escrow account. That's why it stood out. Escrow refunds have rules. Wolfe nodded slowly, and Mr. Klein approved it. The system showed he did, she said. His approval stamp. His login. Wolfe's eyes were cold. Systems record what men instruct them to record. They are obedient. Men are not. I said, did anyone else have approval authority? There's a second approval tier, she said. Finance Director Daniel Ridgeway. But his approval didn't appear, only Mason's. Wolfe's gaze flicked to me. Mr. Goodwin, you will note that a refund after cutoff with only one approval violates policy and would therefore require concealment or intimidation. I'm noting, I said. Also noting that the person who told her to forget it ended up dead within 2 hours. That's efficient. It lacks charm. Wolfe looked at Jenna again. Miss Cross, you are here because you believe your delayed question caused his death. Her cheeks reddened. I don't know. I keep thinking if I had asked earlier, he would have had time to fix it, or someone else would have noticed. Or, she stopped, because the list of imaginary rescues had run out. Wolfe's voice did not soften, but it became less sharp. Delay is not neutral. It changes who gets afraid. That is correct. But you are not responsible for another person's crime unless you committed it. She shook her head quickly. Number Then Wolfe said, "Your guilt is misplaced. Your information is valuable. That is why you are here." The doorbell rang again, as if the house had decided to keep the tempo brisk. Fritz went to answer. A moment later, Inspector Kramer's voice came from the hall, loud and irritated. "Archie, where is he?" "In here," I called. Kramer entered the office like a man stepping into a room where he expects an argument and has brought his own. His coat was damp, his hat was in his hand, and his face had the look it gets when a case is already annoying him. He saw Jenna and grunted. "You came?" She nodded, uneasy. Kramer looked at Wolfe. "We got a locked room at Ridgeway Tower, conference room on the 21st floor. Mason Klein dead. Door locked from the inside. No forced entry, and the timing, like she said, is too neat." Wolfe's tone was mild. "Cause of death?" Kramer's jaw tightened. "Not poison, not a bullet. It looks like blunt force to the head, one strike. No struggle. Medical examiner says it could be a heavy object. We got a tipped chair, spilled coffee, and a man on the carpet. The room's been swept clean of anything obvious. Too clean," I said. "Too clean is suspicious. My apartment is too clean once a year, and I always suspect my mother has been there." Kramer ignored that. "The question is how a man gets killed in a locked room with no forced entry. We got a window, but it doesn't open far enough to be useful. We got an HVAC vent, but unless your murderer is a squirrel, that's out. We got only one door." Wolfe looked at him. "And you came here because you dislike puzzles you cannot solve." Kramer's lips flattened. "I came because the motive is probably buried under paperwork, and because every time paperwork's involved, somebody says your name like it's a cure." Wolfe's expression did not change. "It is not a cure. It is a method. I will require facts." Kramer pulled a thin folder from his coat and slapped it onto my desk. I opened it. Photos, basic report, time log. The conference room was modern. Grey walls, a long table, chairs on casters. One chair tipped, a coffee cup spilled, dark stain on carpet. The door handle looked untouched, but photos lie unless you know where to look. Kramer said, "Time of death estimated between 2:03 and 2:22 this afternoon. He was found at 3:05 by an assistant who had a meeting scheduled. Door was locked. Security had to bring a master key, no signs of tampering on the lock. Miss Cross, at what time did you speak to Mr. Klein?" She swallowed. "About 11:30, I asked him. He told me to forget it." "And he was dead by noon," Wolfe said. "That is not a leisurely sequence," Kramer added. "He left his office at 10:15 according to the receptionist. Said he had a meeting. He entered the conference room alone according to hallway camera. That's where it gets interesting. The hallway camera shows him go in. It does not show anyone else go in before the door was found locked," I said. "Does it show anyone leave?" Kramer's eyes narrowed. "Number. That is the kind of thing cameras do when they are either useless or lied to," I said. Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Inspector who benefits from Mr. Klein's death." Kramer snorted. "That's what I'm paying you to tell me. If I was paying you, Ridgeway Tower is full of people who benefit from other people being dead. If you count promotions and grudges." Wolfe's gaze sharpened. "Do not be flippant. The immediate motive is likely connected to the late refund. Identify all persons with access to approval credentials, all persons associated with Brightwell Solutions, and all persons who met with Mr. Klein this morning." Kramer grimaced. "We're doing that." Wolfe nodded. "You will also provide the building's access logs, conference room booking records, and security master key control." Kramer stared at him. "You want the whole building?" "I want the truth," Wolfe said. "Buildings are merely containers." Kramer glanced at Jenna. "You told him about the refund?" She nodded. Kramer looked back at Wolfe. "So, you taking it?" Wolfe's eyes stayed on Jenna for a moment longer. Then he spoke the line she had already heard, but now he delivered it as a decision. "Delay is not neutral," Wolfe said. "It changes who gets afraid." Miss Cross waited. and in that interval someone arranged to make Mr. Klein either silent or irrelevant. The death is a reaction to a question asked too late. Kramer's jaw tightened. That's a nice speech. I need a murderer. Wolfe's voice remained even. You will have one. I accept the case. On one condition. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Name it. That you do not attempt to hurry me, Wolfe said. Haste causes errors, and errors are the murderer's ally. Also, you will arrange for me to receive the necessary documents without obstruction. Kramer muttered. Something rude. Then nodded. Fine, you'll get your papers. Wolfe turned slightly toward me. Mr. Goodwin, you will go to Ridgeway Tower. I will not enter the conference room unless it is convenient and not crowded. You will enter, you will observe. You will speak with those who have seen what they wish to forget, I said. Yes, sir. I will do the walking, and you will do the thinking, and the city will do the freezing. Jenna Cross spoke. Voice small. Am I in trouble? Wolfe looked at her, and his tone was almost courteous. You are in danger only if you continue to delay. Tell me, Miss Cross, after Mr. Klein told you to forget the refund, what did you do? She blinked. I went back to my desk. I sat there for a while. I kept hearing his voice. I thought about asking someone else. Then the police arrived. Wolfe nodded. You did not tell anyone else? No, she said. Not until the police asked me why I looked sick. Wolfe's eyes held hers. Then you have knowledge that may threaten someone. You will remain accessible. Mr. Goodwin will escort you home, or arrange transport, and you will not go anywhere alone until I say so. Her eyes widened. I don't understand. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. You will. The person who killed Mr. Klein did so to prevent a question from becoming an answer. You are the source of that question. That makes you relevant, and relevance can be hazardous. Kramer grunted. You hear that? Don't do anything stupid. Jenna nodded, pale. I stood and reached for my coat. All right, Ridgeway Tower. If we move fast, we can get there before the conference room gets trampled by helpful people. Wolfe frowned. Trampled is an accurate term for police procedure. Kramer's face reddened. Watch it. Wolfe looked at him with mild contempt. Inspector, if you insist on being offended by accuracy, you will be offended often. That ended that. As we prepared to leave, Fritz appeared briefly in the doorway with the look of a man about to announce lunch. He saw the faces and stopped, then said quietly, Mr. Wolfe. Wolfe's eyes flicked toward him. We will dine upon our return. Fritz nodded, accepting it like a delay in a performance schedule. That is Fritz. He treats crime as a temporary interruption to civilization, not a replacement for it. On the way out, I glanced once at Jenna Cross. She was standing now, still clutching her handbag, eyes fixed on the floor, as if she expected it to open. I said, lightly, because lightness keeps people from breaking. You did one thing right, Miss Cross. You came here. She looked up. Is that right? Sure, I said. If you had delayed that too, Wolfe would have had to solve this with fewer facts. And he dislikes that almost as much as he dislikes cheap coffee. Wolfe's voice came from behind me. Dry, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. Restrain your attempts at comfort, he said. They are clumsy. I grinned. That's why you keep me around for clumsy. We stepped out into the grey January afternoon, where the city looked like it was holding its breath. Ridgeway Tower waited downtown, full of glass and money and people who believed questions could be managed, and somewhere in that tower, a question that should have been harmless had already become lethal. Chapter 2, by the time it's asked. Someone is dead. Ridgeway Tower is the kind of place that makes you want to check your tie even if you do not wear one. Glass, steel, polished stone, and a lobby large enough to host a parade. It sits there downtown like a man with money who has decided to look innocent by wearing a clean shirt. That Monday afternoon, it was running on post-holiday rhythm, which means everyone was busy and nobody was careful. The people were moving fast, talking faster, and making small mistakes with the confidence that January is a fresh notebook. They were wrong about the notebook. In New York, the first pages are always smudged. I left Wolfe in the brownstone because he had told me to go, and because Wolfe believes a locked room is best examined by someone who is allowed to sweat. Before I went, he had delivered one of his morning instructions while seated behind his desk with a cup of coffee that Fritz had brewed, as if it were a moral duty. "You will not be distracted by the murder," Wolfe had said. "That's refreshing," I told him. I was planning to keep the corpse as my main focus. "You will be distracted by the building," he continued, unruffled. "The building will offer you noise, activity, and irrelevant competence. You will ignore these. Seek the minute hand." I had grinned. "Yes, sir. I will find the minute hand and ask it who it belongs to." He had not smiled. "Also, you will observe whether the police have already ruined the scene." "Kramer's people ruin scenes the way I ruin diets," I said. Wolfe's eyes had cooled. "Then work quickly." So I did. At Ridgeway Tower, Inspector Kramer met me at the security desk with a look that said he had already argued with 3 managers and 2 lawyers and had enjoyed none of it. Sergeant Stebbins was there too, loyal and slightly damp. Kramer jerked his head toward the elevators. "Conference room is on 20. When we got it held barely. Every idiot in the building wants to stand around and look concerned." "Concern is cheap," I said. "How are the facts?" He grunted. "Locked room. Door was locked. No tamper marks. Security key opened it at 3:05. Klein inside. Dead. 1 blow to the head. No struggle. We got cameras. We got logs. And we got a big hole in the cameras that makes me want to throw somebody through a window." "Which window?" I asked. "I like options." He ignored that. "Come on." The elevator ride gave me time to watch people. A young man in a suit was talking into a headset as if the headset were a priest. A woman held a coffee and a folder and looked ready to bite anyone who asked her to slow down. A couple of men in maintenance uniform stepped off on 15, and one of them glanced at Kramer's badge with the wary respect of a man who does not want the law in his toolbox. On 21, the air smelled of carpet cleaner and money. People moved in and out of glass, walled offices. The place was busy, noisy, and sloppy in small ways. A stack of outgoing mail sat unattended on a counter. A door to a supply closet was ajar. A receptionist was typing without looking at the screen. When a building runs like that, it becomes easy to slip a lie through the gears. The conference room was at the end of a corridor. A uniformed man stood outside it, as if guarding a vault. He nodded at Kramer. Kramer flashed his badge like a man swinging a club. Inside, the room was exactly as Jenna Cross had described it in Wolfe's office. Long table, swivel chairs, a tipped chair near one end, and a cup on the carpet with coffee cooling into a stain. The air had that faint metallic smell that comes after a room has been closed and reopened by strangers. The body had been removed, thank heaven, because I have always believed that if the dead can do us a favor, they should. But the outline of what had happened was still there. A scuff on the carpet. A faint smear near the baseboard, and the chair tipped, as if Mason Klein had stood up quickly, or been shoved, and the chair had rolled away in protest. Kramer said, "He was found on the far side, near the wall. Door was locked. No one seen enter, no one seen leave." "Except," I said, "the camera gap you mentioned." He grunted, "Except that." I walked the room without touching anything. There were no obvious weapons, which was not surprising. People who kill in office towers rarely leave their tools behind. The coffee cup looked like it had been knocked over in surprise, rather than slowly spilled, which suggested a sudden moment. "Was Klein alone?" I asked. "According to cameras," Kramer said. "He entered at 1:56. Nobody else captured going in before the gap. Nobody captured going out." "You mean nobody captured at all from the gap?" I said. Kramer's eyes hardened. "Exactly." I turned to Stebbins. "What is the timeline?" Stebbins opened his notebook eagerly. "Security logs show Mason Klein badged into this floor at 1:49. He walked down the corridor at 1:55. He entered the conference room at 1:56. We have that on camera. Then the next time we have him is never. His body was found at 3:05 when the assistant arrived for a meeting and the room did not answer. And the door was locked," I said. Stebbins nodded. Locked. We used a master key. There was no tampering on the lock cylinder. Where is the key kept? I asked. Security office, Kramer said. Logbook, a supervisor signs it out. Who signed it out at 3:05? I asked. Kramer's mouth tightened. Security supervisor named Latham. He's downstairs. He claims it never left his hand. Claims are cheap too, I said. Kramer snorted. You got that right, I asked. What about the meeting Klein was supposed to have? Kramer reached into his coat and pulled out a printout. His calendar. Look at this. I took it and scanned. There were meetings with names, initials, departments, all the usual executive nonsense. Then at 2 p.m., a meeting labeled only Q, no attendees listed, no location beyond conference room, 21C. I looked up. Q. Kramer nodded. That's all it says. That could be a person, I said. Or a quarter, or a question. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Or a setup. Did he have anything else on his calendar? I asked, like a habit of using single letters. Stebbins said, not that we saw, most entries are detailed. So Q stood out like a stain. I left the conference room and went to the corridor receptionist, a woman with efficient hands and a face that had learned to stay neutral because neutrality keeps you employed. Her nameplate said, Sandra Lee. Kramer introduced me, which made her tense. I took over because Kramer's version of conversation is a hammer. Miss Lee, I said, I need a small detail. And small details are easier to remember than big ones. Did you see anyone near this conference room around 2:10? Her eyes flicked toward Kramer. I already told the police. Tell me, I said. If your detail matches, we all save time. She swallowed. I saw a service worker pass the room around 2:10, maintenance or delivery. I don't know. He was carrying a thin envelope, like inter-office mail. He didn't stop. He just passed. A man, I said. Describe him. She frowned. Trying, average height, dark jacket, not a suit. Head down. He moved fast, like he belonged. Kramer leaned in. Did you see him go into the room? No, she said quickly. He passed the door. I didn't see him enter. Did you see him come back? I asked. No, she said. Could you be wrong about the time? I asked. She shook her head. Number I remember because I had just looked at the clock. I was waiting for a call at 2:15. Where is that clock? I asked. She pointed. It was a digital wall clock above the corridor junction, bright red numbers. I made a note. Digital clocks make people confident about time. They should not, but they do, Kramer muttered. Service worker with an envelope. Great. Envelope is interesting, I said. A weapon does not fit in a thin envelope unless it is poison, and you said blunt force. Maybe the envelope is a distraction, or a reason to open the door, I said. A man inside a room will open for something that looks official. Kramer's eyes tightened. Door was locked from inside. Locked from inside when found, I corrected. Not necessarily locked the whole time. That made him grimace, because it opened the problem, instead of closing it. We went back to the security office downstairs, where the cameras and logs lived. The room had monitors, a desk, a coffee cup that looked like it had never been washed, and a security supervisor named Latham, who had the weary confidence of a man who thinks cameras make him powerful. Cameras do make men powerful until they do not. Kramer asked, show us the corridor footage from 1:50 to 3:10. Latham nodded, tight-lipped and tapped keys. The corridor view appeared. We saw Mason Klein walk down the hall at 1:55, alone, carrying a folder. He entered the conference room at 1:56. He did not look nervous. He looked annoyed, like a man on his way to a meeting he expects to control. Then, at 2:03, the screen froze. A small message popped up, system update. At 2:22, the corridor view returned. Kramer said, that's your update. Latham's jaw tightened. Yes, scheduled patch happens weekly. Weekly, I said, conveniently timed. It's automatic, Latham insisted. We don't choose the minute. Who does? I asked. Vendor, he said. I looked at Kramer. We need it. Kramer grunted. We got them. They're downstairs with lawyers. I turned back to the footage, from 2:22 to 3:05. The corridor showed movement. Employees passing, a man in a suit, talking on a phone, a woman wheeling a cart. Nobody entered the conference room that the camera captured. Nobody left. Do you have camera inside the room? I asked. Latham shook his head. Number privacy. Privacy is a lovely idea, I said. It makes murder easier. Kramer snapped. Who logged the update? Latham tapped again and brought up an event log. The update was labeled routine. No manual trigger. But the time stamp was precise. 2:03 to 2:22, I said. Who benefits from a gap of 19 minutes? Kramer answered. The killer. Yes, I said. And anyone who needed a performance. Kramer scowled. Performance. You and Wolfe, with the poetry. Not poetry, I said. Structure. The meeting is at 2. The camera gap begins at 2:03. The service worker passes at 2:10. This is not random. It is a routine built around a time slot. It is meant to be tight. Kramer's eyes were hard. Inside job, someone with access, someone in the building, or someone who can look like he belongs, I said. A service worker does that. We returned to the 21st floor and went to Mason Klein's office. His assistant, a young man with a frightened face, let us in after Kramer barked the necessary threats. The office was neat in a way that felt practiced. Klein had been the kind of man who did not leave papers lying around unless they were meant to be seen. His computer was locked. It had already imaged it. According to Kramer, his desk held a calendar pad, a pen set, and a small stack of folders labeled Q4, refunds, and escrow. He asked the assistant, did Mr. Klein receive any mail around 2? The assistant swallowed. There was interoffice. Sometimes he picked it up himself. Did he mention the meeting labeled Q? I asked. The assistant shook his head. Number, he just said he had a meeting and not to disturb him. That was one more detail. Men who fear interruption usually fear what the interruption might reveal. While Kramer questioned the assistant, I asked Jenna Cross to forward me anything she had written about the late refund. She was at home under Kramer's instruction, but she had access to her work email on her phone, and she was nervous enough to comply quickly. A few minutes later, my own phone buzzed with a forwarded screenshot. It was an email draft. Never sent. Subject line, late refund approval question body. Hi Mason, quick question. Who approved the late refund to Brightwell Solutions last week? I noticed it posted after cutoff and only shows your approval. Want to make sure it is correct before closeout. Drafted last week. Saved, never sent. I stared at it long enough that the assistant's nervous breathing became loud. The question existed earlier. It sat in a drawer because Jenna Cross was afraid. I called Wolfe from the corridor outside the office because Wolfe prefers updates promptly and because my voice was starting to itch with the need to tell him. He answered on the second ring. Report. Ridgeway Tower is busy and careless, I said. Klein's calendar shows a 2 p.m. meeting labeled only Q. No attendees listed. Security logs show Klein entered the conference room at 1:56 and never exited until found at 3:05. Receptionist claims she saw a service worker pass the room at 2:10 carrying a thin envelope. Cameras have a gap from 2:03 to 2:22 labeled system update. Kramer thinks inside job. I think it is timed. There was a pause, the kind that means Wolfe is already assembling. I added, and Jenna had an email draft from last week, unsent, asking Klein who approved the late refund. The question existed earlier, but fear kept it in a drawer. That is what this looks like, I said. The meeting labeled Q, the camera update window, and a service worker with an envelope. It feels arranged. Because it is, Wolfe said. Do not assume the update is routine. Verify who can schedule it, who can alter it, and who can exploit it. The gap is a stage. Anything else? I asked. Yes, Wolfe replied. Find out what Q means. It may be a person, It may be a code. It may be the refund itself. The murderer chose that label because it would not alarm an observer. It is camouflage, like the time on your earlier ledger entry in another affair. I said, camouflage is becoming fashionable. Wolfe ignored that. Also determine whether Mr. Klein expected an envelope. If he did, it was the lure. If he did not, it was the distraction. Got it, I said. Before I hung up, Wolfe added, Mr. Goodwin. Yes, sir. Do not allow Inspector Kramer to trample the delicate elements. His men will be eager. Delicate elements, I said, in a murder. Delicate facts. Wolfe corrected. Do not be foolish. I ended the call and went back to work. First, I went to it because anyone who controls a camera update controls a gap, and gaps are the murderer's friend. I found Ridgway's it lead, a woman named Priya Lang, in a small glass office with a lawyer hovering nearby like a cloud. Kramer began with his usual style, which is to treat cooperation as a traffic rule. Priya Lang said, the camera update is automated. Vendor push, we get a schedule. We do not choose the exact minute, I said. Do you get notice? Yes, she replied. A window. Who receives it? I asked. It distribution list, she said. Security included. Can the window be changed? I asked. Priya hesitated. In theory. Yes, if someone had admin access, they could defer it or force it. Kramer's eyes sharpened. Who has admin access? Priya glanced at the lawyer. The lawyer said nothing, which is what lawyers do when silence is safer. Priya said, 3 people, me, my deputy, and a contractor who handles vendor liaison. Name, I said. Grant Haskins, she replied. That was a new name. And new names are always welcome because they give you someone to bother. Kramer wrote it down with satisfaction. Bring him in. I turned back to the 21st floor to look again at the conference room door. The lock had no sign of tampering, but locks rarely show signs when the key is allowed. I stood there a moment, letting the corridor noise wash past, and thought about the service worker with the envelope. A thin envelope could carry a note, a small device, a key card, a pass, or a threat. It could also carry nothing at all if its purpose was to make someone look official while moving through a hallway. A performance. Kramer was right that it smelled like an inside job. Wolfe was right that it smelled like timing. The two were not opposites, they were layers. I took one more look at the meeting entry, QA letter that could mean anything, and therefore meant something. By the time I left Ridgway Tower, it was nearly dark, and the city outside looked like it had been smeared with cold. I rode back uptown and entered the brownstone with relief, because Wolfe's house is always warmer than the city deserves. The smell from Fritz's kitchen told me dinner was approaching, and Fritz's quiet competence told me the house was steady, even if the world was not. Wolfe was in the office, seated as always, with a book open but not truly read. He looked up as I entered. You have found the stage? Yes, I said, and handed him my notes. And I found the earlier question too, drafted and unsent. Wolfe's eyes lowered to the papers, then lifted again. Fear kept it in a drawer, he murmured. I nodded. And while it sat there, someone built a timed performance. Meeting labeled Q, camera update window, a service worker with an envelope, and a locked room finale. Wolfe's voice was calm, but it carried that sharpness that means he is enjoying the problem the way a gourmet enjoys a difficult sauce. When a question is delayed, someone else gets time to prepare an answer. I said, so now we find out who prepared it. Wolfe's gaze held mine. Yes, and we will do so by reopening the moment the question should have been asked. That is the only honest method. That was Wolfe, always convinced that time could be reconstructed if you were stubborn enough and smart enough and sufficiently contemptuous of excuses. Outside, New York kept hurrying, careless and cold. Inside, Wolfe's office became quiet again, not restful quiet, but attentive quiet. The kind you get when a trap is being designed and the only missing piece is the person who thinks he has already escaped. Chapter 3. The The missed moment, Wolfe, has a way of making an instruction sound like a sentence already served. The morning after my trip to Ridgeway Tower, he was in his office behind the desk. Coffee at his right hand, the air of the brownstone behaving itself, and the whole world outside behaving badly. Fritz had brought the tray in with the sort of quiet competence that makes you forgive the human race briefly. From upstairs there drifted that faint, clean greenhouse scent that always makes me think Wolfe's orchids are the only citizens in New York who never have to compromise. Wolfe looked at me over his cup. "Mr. Goodwin, you will determine what would have happened had Miss Cross asked her question immediately." I said, "You want a history that did not occur." "I want the shape of it," he replied. If her question had been asked in early January, it would have forced a sequence. That sequence was prevented. Discover how and by whom. I leaned back and exhaled smoke toward the ceiling, because it seemed polite to let the ceiling have something to do. I'll go ask the living what they would have done if they were braver. Wolfe's eyes were flat. "Do not indulge in mockery. This is essential. The murderer did not kill Mr. Klein because he enjoyed violence. He killed because time had been used as a weapon." I nodded. Wolfe can be insufferable, but he is seldom wrong about structure. "All right, I'll reconstruct the missed moment. And," Wolfe added, "you will look for the second signature." I frowned. Second signature. Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. Miss Cross stated that the late refund required 2 approvals. One is Mr. Klein. The other must exist, identify it. That was Wolfe, always reducing a messy human crisis to a list of gates and gatekeepers. I took a taxi down to Ridgeway Tower with a notebook in my pocket and Wolfe's voice in my ear. The city was still grey, but a different grey, the kind that looks like it might lift and then decides not to. Outside Ridgeway Tower, people hurried in and out with their collars up and their minds already in the next hour. In a building like that, a death becomes an inconvenience in the lobby and a rumor on the elevators. Inside, Kramer had men posted, and security had the stiff, resentful look of people forced to admit their cameras are not gods. Sergeant Stebbins met me by the desk and pointed me toward an office where I could talk without being overheard by half the building. "It is cooperative," Stebbins said, "mostly." "That's a nice change," I told him. Who is least cooperative? He did not have to think operations. That fit my own experience of companies. Finance will confess to numbers. Operations will confess to nothing and call it efficiency. I started with Jenna Cross, because Wolfe was right about one thing. And it is not the orchids. If you want the truth about a delayed question, you ask the person who delayed it while the regret is still fresh. Kramer had her in a small conference room on a lower floor, away from the executives and the lawyers. She looked tired, and she looked angry at herself, which is a combination that produces honesty if you do not bully it out of her. She stood when I entered, then sat quickly when she recognized me. "Mr. Goodwin." "Jenna," I said, "I'm going to ask you to do something unpleasant. I want you to imagine you did not hesitate." Her eyes widened. "I tried to. I keep doing it." "Good," I said. "Then you're warmed up." Early January, first week back, you see the late refund. "What do you do?" She swallowed. I would have asked Mason, that was the point. He told me the first week back is always messy. He called them normal adjustments. "Did you believe him?" I asked. She hesitated, and her cheeks reddened. "I wanted to. Everyone was overwhelmed." He said the calendar changed, but the books don't behave instantly. He said there are always corrections, he told me. I was young and anxious. I nodded. "And you decided to be young and quiet?" Her jaw tightened. "Yes." "Was he kind about it?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not kind, firm. Like he was doing me a favor by shutting me up." "And you thought he was?" I said. She looked down. "I thought he was protecting me from looking stupid." "Or protecting himself," I said. Her hands twisted together. If I had asked then, I would have had to root it for second approval. That is policy. "That," I said, "is the part Wolfe likes." "The gate. Who is the second signature?" She blinked. "Nolan Reed." I wrote it down. Title: Operations Coordinator, Jenna said. "He signs off on refunds tied to service adjustments. That's how it was explained. If it's a vendor service issue, operations verifies it. Finance approves it. Would Nolan have noticed? I asked. She shook her head quickly. He would have hated it. He hates paperwork. But if I had asked early, it would have gone to him. He would have had to sign, or refuse, or ask why. And if he asked why, I said, Summoning would have had to answer. Her eyes lifted, and the fear there was mixed with relief, as if she had just realized her hesitation had been a gift to someone else. I said, Now tell me about the refund itself, Brightwell Solutions. Where did that name come from? Jenna frowned. It was a payee label. But when I looked deeper, the internal reference pointed to North Dock Services. That name hit me as if someone had tapped a bell. North Dock, not Brightwell. She nodded. North Dock Services shows up in corrected entries, not in the original vendor list. It appears after someone edits the description fields, like it's been cleaned up or renamed. Your named vendors are convenient, I said. They keep auditors from recognizing a pattern. Where did you see it? In the correction log, Jenna said. Mason's team would correct labels after month end. It was supposed to be harmless formatting. Harmless, there was that word again, like a bad penny showing up in a new pocket. I leaned forward. Jenna, did Mason ever mention North Dock? Her eyes flicked away. Once, he said North Dock was an operations partner. He said the name shouldn't show in standard reports because it confused clients. He told me to ignore it. Wolfe's voice echoed in my mind. Habits do not change because the calendar does. If Mason had been telling people to ignore North Dock was worth staring at until your eyes hurt. I left Jenna with a final instruction. If you remember anything else, even if it feels small, you call me. Not tomorrow. Not after you sleep on it. Immediately. She nodded hard. I will. Next I went to the staff, who had worked under Mason, because a supervisor's habits are often described accurately by the people he irritated most. I found a senior accounts analyst named Tara Fenn, a woman with sharp eyes and a mouth that looked permanently ready to argue. She greeted me with the expression of someone who did not enjoy strangers, and enjoyed police less, but enjoyed the idea of someone else being blamed more. You worked for Klein, I said. I survived Klein, she corrected. What did he say about first, weak errors? I asked. She snorted. Normal adjustments. He used that phrase like a blanket. If you questioned a correction, he'd say it was normal. If you questioned why he was correcting it, he'd say the system needed smoothing. He liked smoothing. Smoothing what? I asked. She looked at me, weighing whether honesty might cost her. Then she decided it would not. Anything that would make someone ask questions. He didn't like questions. He liked silence and spreadsheets. That fits, I said. Tell me about North Dock Services. Her eyes tightened. North Dock only appears after corrections, never in original entries. It's like someone wants the name in the internal trail but not in the surface reports. Why would someone want that? I asked. She shrugged. Because operations needed it, or because someone wanted a path. A path to what? I pressed. She leaned forward slightly. Refunds, service credits, vendor adjustments. It's a place where money can move without sounding like money. That was valuable. In an office, a refund sounds harmless because it is supposed to be money returning to someone. But a refund is also money leaving you, and if you decide who receives it, it is as good as theft with better manners. I asked. If Jenna had asked early, who would have gotten nervous? Tara did not hesitate. Mason and Nolan Reed. Nolan, I said. Explain. Tara's mouth tightened. He doesn't like finance near his operations. He acts like budgets are a foreign invasion, but he's in the corridor a lot. What corridor? I asked. She nodded toward a hallway that led to the finance wing. Access controlled. Finance corridor. Badge access required. I thanked her and went to security because badges do not lie unless someone teaches them. I asked for Nolan Reed's access history, security supervisor. Latham tried to resist. We can't just hand out access logs. Kramer can, I said. He will, and he will make you wish you had done it earlier, without drama. Latham did not like that, but he liked Kramer's scowl less. He printed a summary, and I read it with quiet pleasure. Nolan Reed's badge accessed the finance corridor frequently, not once a month. Not during budget season, but routinely, sometimes twice a day, sometimes early. If Nolan truly did not handle finance, he had a strange hobby. I found Nolan Reed in an operations office on a mid-level floor, away from the executive glass and closer to the pulse of the building. He was in his 30s, broad, shouldered, with the blunt, efficient look of a man who thinks the world is divided into people who do work and people who talk about it. He stood when I entered, not polite, but ready. "Who are you?" he demanded. His eyes flicked, and I saw recognition. That happens. Wolfe's name travels in New York the way smoke does. What do you want? I want you to explain why your badge likes the finance corridor, I said. He blinked once, then scowled. I don't handle finance. That was going to be my next question, I said. Thanks for saving me time. Now answer the first. His jaw worked. I go there because operations has to coordinate service issues, refunds, credits, things like that. Your funds like the late refund, I said. He stiffened. I don't know about any late refund. That's interesting, I said, because Jenna Cross says you would have had to sign it if she had asked the question early. His eyes narrowed. Jenna, she should have come to me if she had a problem. She did not, I said. She was told first. Weak errors were normal adjustments. Was that you or Mason? Mason, Nolan said quickly, too quickly. Did Mason tell you to expect questions? I asked. Nolan hesitated, and hesitation in a man like Nolan is loud. I smiled slightly. Nolan, you look like a man who believes in directness. I respect that. Be direct now. Were you supposed to attend a meeting at 2 p.m. with Mason Klein? He stared at me. What? Mason's calendar had a 2 p.m. meeting, labeled Q, I said. No attendees listed. That is unusual. Are you the Q? His face flushed. Number, then who? I asked. He shook his head. I don't know. That was a lie. Or it was the kind of ignorance that is deliberately maintained, because knowledge is expensive. I leaned closer, friendly. Your badge was in the finance corridor often. Your signature was required on refunds like this. You are operations coordinator, and Mason ends up dead in a locked conference room scheduled for a mystery meeting. You can either keep telling me you don't know, or you can start telling the truth and hope Wolfe likes the sound of it. I didn't accuse you, I said. I accused your badge. He swallowed. Look, Mason and I argued. We argued about procedures. He wanted operations to sign things without making noise. I didn't like being used as a stamp. A stamp is authority, I said. Wolfe would approve of that description. Did Mason ask you to sign off on North Dock? Related refunds. Nolan's gaze slid away. Sometimes. Did you sign? I asked. He clenched his jaw. Sometimes. Without reading? I asked. His shoulders tightened. Sometimes. That word was doing heavy work, I said. If Jenna had asked early January, it would have required your signature. Would you have signed? He hesitated again. It depends. On what? I asked. On whether Mason was in the room, Nolan said. And his voice had bitterness now. He could talk people into thinking something was routine. He was good at it. So Jenna delayed. Mason had time, I said. Time to arrange something, like a meeting at 2. Nolan's eyes hardened. I didn't schedule any meeting. I changed angle. Who did? He shook his head, stubborn. I don't know. I left him with that, because pushing harder would only make him lock down, and I already had something. Nolan's admission that he had been used as a signature tool made him a gatekeeper, and gatekeepers attract pressure. Now I needed one more piece. Wolfe's version of a clincher is often a small, ugly detail that makes the whole structure stand. I went back to Mason Klein's office area and asked Kramer's men if the waste bins from Klein's office had been collected. Stebbins helped, eager as always. We bagged his desk trash. It's with evidence. Why? Because men who like corrections also like reminders, I said. And they sometimes forget to correct the reminders. Stebbins got me a glance at the bag under supervision. The contents were office trash, wrappers, a broken pencil, a torn printout. I dug carefully with gloved hands, because even I have learned not to leave my fingerprints in evidence bags if I can help it. Near the bottom I found it. A sticky note, yellow, slightly crumpled. The handwriting was blocky, not Jenna's neat hand, and not Tara's sharp script. It looked like Mason's from the few samples I had seen, the kind of handwriting that tries to be authoritative and ends up looking impatient. 4 words. If she asks, meet 2 o'clock. I stared at it long enough that Stebbins shifted, nervous. That means something. It means everything, I said. I took a photo for my record and reported it properly so the chain of custody stayed clean. Then I left Ridgeway Tower with the sticky notes message burning in my head more effectively than any confession. Back at West 35th Street, the brownstone was calm in its usual way, as if it had never heard of Ridgeway Tower, and did not care to. The air was warm, the rugs absorbed sound. Somewhere upstairs, Wolfe's orchids were enjoying their orderly light, and Fritz's kitchen smelled like a man was attempting to prove that civilization still existed. Wolfe was in his office, of course. He looked as if he had never moved since I left. That is one of his more irritating talents. I gave him the report in the sequence he liked, which is to say, in the sequence that makes his mind build the structure without stopping to scold me. Wolfe, I said, you asked what would have happened if Jenna asked early. She would have routed the refund question for second approval. The second signature is Nolan Reed, operations coordinator. Jenna hesitated because Mason told her first. Weak errors were normal adjustments. He used that phrase as comfort and as a muzzle. Wolfe's eyes narrowed slightly, as expected. I continued. Staff say North Dock Services appears only in corrected entries, never in original vendor records. It looks like a name inserted into the internal trail without appearing on surface reports. Jenna says Brightwell Solutions was the payee label, but the internal reference points to North Dock Services. It is a cleaned name, a mask. Wolfe's gaze stayed fixed, and the habit. Habits did not change because the calendar did, I said. Because Wolfe likes his own lines returned to him. It logs show someone accessed Mason's account after hours repeatedly, often between 6 and 7 a.m. Wolfe's eyebrows rose. Eerily, I agreed. Not the 2 p.m. show, but the rehearsal. Someone was using his credentials when the building was quiet. Wolfe nodded once, satisfied. I went on. Nolan Reed claims he doesn't handle finance, but his badge accesses the finance corridor frequently. He admitted Mason pressured him to sign off on operations refunds. Sometimes, without reading, he resented being used as a stamp. Wolfe's mouth tightened. Pressure, leverage. And, I said, here's the part you'll like in Mason's office waste bin. There was a sticky note. It says, if she asks, meet 2 o'clock. I handed him the photo. Wolfe looked at it, and for a moment the room went very still, as if even the brownstone was listening. Then Wolfe murmured, not loudly, but with the satisfaction of a man seeing the last beam slot into place. So the weapon was not the blow, he said. The weapon was the delay that allowed a meeting to be arranged. I nodded. Jenna delayed the question. Someone used the delay to schedule the answer. 2 p.m. meeting Q camera update gap. Service worker with an envelope, locked room. Wolfe's eyes lifted to mine. Mr. Goodwin, you have brought me the missed moment. Now we will compel the living to admit what they did with it. Outside, New York kept moving, careless and cold. Inside Wolfe's office, the question that waited had finally become dangerous to the people who thought they could control it. Chapter 4. Reconstructing the late question if there is a thing in New York that can be counted on. It is that people will tell you the truth when it is safe and lie when it is convenient. The part that keeps Wolfe in business is that convenience has patterns, and patterns can be trapped. That morning in the brownstone, Wolfe behaved as if the city outside were a minor inconvenience, and the case were an irritation that would be improved by discipline. He had already finished his orchid inspection upstairs, which meant he had spoken sternly to blossoms and corrected whatever offended him. The greenhouse scent was faint in the hall, clean and slightly sweet, the smell of order. In the office, Wolfe sat behind his desk with a sheaf of papers arranged, as if he had laid them out with a ruler. I had delivered my report the night before, including Jenna's unsent draft and the sticky note that said, "If she asks, meet 2 o'clock." Wolfe had slept on it, which is not as common as you might think, because Wolfe prefers to solve problems rather than let them sleep. He looked at me over his coffee cup. "We will reconstruct the chain," I said. "You mean Jenna delays, Mason relaxes, Nolan stiffens, and the world ends in a conference room." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Your flippancy is tiresome." Yes, the delay created a pocket of time. In that pocket, Mr. Klein continued a habit. Mr. Reed perceived risk. A plan formed. Plans leave traces. "Traces like a sticky note in a waste bin," I said. Wolfe did not concede the point, but his eyes approved it. "Precisely. Now we replace conjecture with detail. Go." So I went. That is my role. Wolfe stays in the brownstone and conducts logic like an orchestra. I go downtown and interview the violinists who swear they never played that note. Ridgeway Tower was busy in the way it always is in January. When everyone is pretending that the new calendar has changed their nature, it had not. The lobby was full of people on headsets, people with coffee, people looking at screens as if screens were parents. The security desk had 2 new men who looked like they had been told to be more alert, and the old supervisor, Latham, looked like he had been told to take the blame if they were not. Kramer was already upstairs. He had called me from a payphone, because Kramer likes phones that do not store records, which is ironic. He told me he had something on the lock. He sounded pleased, which is never a comfortable sound from a policeman. I went first to Jenna Cross. Kramer had her in a small side office again, away from the corridor traffic. She looked less pale than she had been, but only because fear had settled into anger. Anger is sometimes healthier. It keeps people from dissolving. "Jenna," I said, "I need the exact moment." Her eyes narrowed. "The moment?" I asked. "Yes," I said, "not the email draft, not the days you stared at it. The second your mouth opened, and Mason Klein heard you." She swallowed. "It was yesterday at 11:30. I wrote it down. 11:30 A. You asked him in person." "Yes," she said quickly, as if relieved to be precise. "I didn't send the email. I walked to his office. I thought if I asked to face he would answer. I thought he couldn't dismiss me as easily." "Did he?" I asked. "How?" I said. "He looked at me like I was stupid," she said. "He said, 'Jenna, do you want to keep your job? Then forget it.' He said the first. Weak errors are normal adjustments. He said I was making trouble. 'And you,' I said, 'did not forget it.'" Her eyes flashed. I went back to my desk and sat there shaking. I started typing the email again. I thought maybe I should send it to Nolan Reed. Then the police came. That was good. It gave the sequence a clean hinge. Jenna asked at 11:30. Mason reacted. Something was arranged before 2. "You told no one before you asked Mason?" I said. She shook her head. I was ashamed. I thought it was nothing. "And the moment you asked," I said, "it stopped being nothing." She nodded, and her eyes looked damp, but she did not cry. People who work in finance learn to hold things in, because numbers do not care about tears. I asked one more question. "When Mason told you to forget it, did he call anyone right away?" She frowned. "He picked up his phone. He turned his chair so I couldn't see. He told me to go back to my desk. I left. That was enough. The rest would be in records. If we could pry them out." Next I went to it. Priya Lang was in her glass office again, still surrounded by the thin smell of nervousness that comes when lawyers are nearby. This time, the lawyer had moved to a chair in the corner and was pretending to be invisible. Lawyers are excellent at pretending. I said to Priya, "We need Mason Klein's work phone logs." Priya's eyes tightened. "Those are controlled." "Controlled by whom?" I asked. "Corporate policy," she said. "Corporate policy is not a person," I said, "who presses the buttons." She glanced at the lawyer. The lawyer said, "We will comply with law enforcement requests." Kramer's voice came from behind me like a door slamming. "It is a law enforcement request." Priya exhaled. We pulled a partial. Someone deleted recent calls on Mason's work phone, but the carrier logs still show them. We recovered the deleted record entries from the device image as well. That was a lovely sentence. It had the words deleted and recovered in it, and those words make detectives happy. "Time," I said. Priya tapped at her keyboard and slid a printout toward me, then toward Kramer, because she feared his hands more than mine. 2 calls, both from Mason Klein to Nolan Reed, one at 11:34, one at 11:38, deleted from the work phone interface at 12:02. I looked up at Priya. "So he called Nolan twice, within 8 minutes of Jenna asking him." Priya nodded. "Yes. And he deleted those calls," I said, "an hour later." Priya nodded again, reluctant. "Yes." Kramer's mouth tightened. "Why delete if it was innocent?" "Because it wasn't," I said. Priya said, "It is possible he deleted routinely." "Isn't 2 calls to the same man," I said. "Deleted the same day he dies. That's not routine. That's panic wearing a routine costume." Kramer grunted approval, which is as close as he comes to a compliment. I asked Priya, "Can you tell if Nolan answered?" She shook her head. "The carrier log shows duration. The first was 46 seconds, the second was 2 minutes. "Long enough to arrange a meeting," I said. The lawyer in the corner shifted slightly. He did not like the way my voice was treating those calls as a rope. Now I needed the calendar entry. "Priya," I said, "Mason's calendar shows a 2 p.m. meeting labeled Q. It appears at 12:07. Who created it?" Priya's eyes flicked again. We looked. It was created from an admin device linked to Nolan Reed. That was the kind of fact that makes a case begin to stand up on its own legs. Kramer leaned forward. "You're sure?" Priya nodded, firmer now because she was on technical ground. "We have device signatures for calendar creation. It was created at 12:07 p.m. from Nolan Reed's admin tablet, which has elevated permissions for scheduling facility and operations coordination events." I asked, "Meaning Nolan could create events on other people's calendars?" "Yes," she said. "He can, within certain categories." Kramer's eyes were hard. So Nolan didn't wait. He reacted immediately. "That's the point," I said. "The question at 11:30 gave him a reason. By 12:07 he had built a meeting around it." Kramer muttered something rude about people who schedule murder. I took the printouts and went hunting for Nolan Reed. He was not at his desk. Operations had the look of a disturbed hive. People were working, but the work had a brittle edge now, because one of their own was suddenly important to homicide. A woman named Callie Voss, Nolan's assistant, met my eyes and stiffened. She looked like she had been rehearsing a lie all morning. "I need Nolan," I said. "He's in a facilities walk through," she said quickly. "Convenient," I said. "Where?" She hesitated. "Lauer Mechanical." "Tell him Archie Goodwin is looking for him," I said, "and tell him it's about his calendar habits." Her eyes widened slightly. "I don't know what you mean." "You will," I said, and left before she could ask. I went to facilities next, because Wolfe had taught me years ago that a building is often a more dangerous suspect than any person in it. Buildings have locks, cameras, schedules, and the comforting illusion that systems do not lie. Kramer met me in the corridor outside conference room 21C with a grim face. "We got the lock story," he said. "Tell me," I said. He jabbed a thumb at the door. "Not forced. It was set to privacy mode." I raised my eyebrows. "Privacy mode, facility setting," Kramer said. It makes the door lock from inside with a latch mechanism that holds until reset. It can also be triggered by a facility staff override if they need to secure a room for executive meetings. So, I said. Not a simple lock, a special state. Kramer nodded. Only facility staff can trigger it, or someone with facility access on their admin device. I felt the case tighten. Nolan oversees facility access. Kramer's jaw clenched. That's what we're finding. We went down to the facility office, which is a cramped room that smells of tools and old coffee, and the resigned belief that nobody appreciates maintenance until something breaks. The facility manager, a thick-necked man named Jorge Malden, met Kramer's badge with immediate dislike. "We don't do murder," Malden said. "No," Kramer replied. "You do locks. Tell me who can trigger privacy mode on a conference room." Malden hesitated. "Me, 2 supervisors and operations, sometimes. Nolan Reed has authorization. Executive meetings, sensitive discussions. He can set rooms." "Can he set them remotely?" I asked. Malden's eyes narrowed at me, but he answered. "Through the building control panel and his admin device. Yes, it's tied to access control," Kramer said. "Was privacy mode set yesterday?" Malden glanced at a log screen and swallowed. "Yes, time," I said. Malden tapped. "It was set at 1:52 p.m. Kramer's eyes hardened, 4 minutes before Mason entered. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with January. "Who set it?" Kramer demanded. Malden's throat worked. "It shows Nolan Reed's credential." That made the corridor feel suddenly narrower. Kramer let out a slow breath. "So Nolan set the room to privacy mode before Mason walked in, and then the camera gap covered the window when anyone else could enter," I said. "And Nolan knew exactly which camera feeds update during scheduled maintenance." Malden shifted uneasily. "Nolan coordinates with security, and it on maintenance windows. He hates surprises. He likes everything clean," Kramer snorted. "Clean like a locked room." Malden's face reddened. "I'm just saying he knows schedules." "Schedules are weapons," I said, and Malden looked at me like I had just insulted his tools. We went back upstairs, and Kramer's men were already pulling more security footage and access logs. Nolan Reed still had not appeared, which was interesting. Innocent men return calls when homicide walks into their building. Guilty men go quiet, and hope quiet becomes invisible. I called Wolfe from the corridor, because my notes were now thick enough to qualify as a short novel, and Wolfe prefers not to be surprised by chapters. He answered with his usual calm. "Report." Jenna asked Mason face. "To face at 11:30, I said. "No email record, memory only." Within minutes, Mason called Nolan twice at 11:34 and 11:38. He deleted the calls from his work phone at 12:02, but it recovered them from carrier logs and the device image. The 2 p.m. meeting labeled Q was created at 12:07 from Nolan Reed's admin device, so Nolan reacted fast and built a controlled confrontation. Wolfe's voice sharpened slightly. "Continue." "The lock wasn't forced," I said. "Conference room door was set to privacy mode. Only facility staff or authorized operations can trigger it. Facility logs show privacy mode set at 1:52 using Nolan's credential. Nolan oversees facility access and coordinates maintenance schedules. He knows which camera feeds update and when. He had the safest time window and used it." There was a pause, but this one was shorter. Wolfe did not need time to arrange these facts. They arranged themselves. "So," Wolfe said, "the delayed question created justification. An urgent private meeting, a controlled room, a convenient camera gap." "Yes," I said. Wolfe's voice was quiet. "Timing determines truth. He timed the truth so it could be killed." I said, "Kramer will want cuffs." "Kramer always wants cuffs," Wolfe replied. "We want certainty. Do not allow Mr. Reed to hide behind procedure. Bring him to me, or bring me enough to command his presence." "I'll try," I said. "He's hiding." Then, Wolfe said, "Flush him mentioned that it has recovered the deleted calls. Mention privacy mode logs. A guilty man will move. That was Wolfe's favorite kind of trap. Not a physical one, but a psychological one. Make the guilty believe the walls are closing, and they will try to squeeze out. The squeeze is visible. I hung up and went straight back to operations. Callie Voss was still at her desk, fingers hovering over a keyboard as if she had forgotten what keys do. I leaned in friendly and sharp. Callie, tell Nolan that it recovered the deleted calls, and facility logs show who set privacy mode. If he wants to explain his scheduling habits, now is his moment. Her face went pale so fast I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered. You do, I said. And so does he. Where is he? She hesitated, then said, He's on 27, Executive Terrace. He went up to speak with Daniel Ridgway. That was interesting. Nolan was trying to anchor himself to the company's top, as if proximity to power could disinfect him. I took the elevator to 27 and found the Executive Terrace area, which is what companies call a floor with nicer carpet and fewer people. The offices were larger, the glass cleaner, the silence more expensive. Daniel Ridgway's office was at the end, and outside it Nolan Reed stood with his hands in his pockets, staring at a framed city view, as if the city were responsible for his troubles. He looked composed, but his jaw was too tight. He turned when he saw me. His eyes sharpened. You again. Me again, I said. Nolan, your calendar entry habits are turning into a homicide issue. He stiffened. I didn't kill Mason. That sentence is becoming popular, I said. Let's talk about something simpler, privacy mode. His eyes narrowed. What? Facility logs show privacy mode set at 152 with your credential, I said. And it logs show you created the queue meeting at 12:07 from your admin device. Mason called you twice at 11:34 and 11:38, then deleted the calls from his phone at 12:02. It recovered them anyway. I watched his face as I spoke. Wolfe had told me to flush him by naming the walls. It worked. Nolan's expression did not collapse, but it shifted, like a man realizing the floor is not where he thought it was. He said carefully, You're twisting routine building management into murder. I'm twisting nothing, I said. I'm straightening the timeline. Jenna asks at 11:30. Mason calls you twice minutes later. You schedule a meeting on his calendar at 12:07. You set the room lock at 1:52. The cameras go dark at 2:03. Mason is dead by 3. That's not routine. That's choreography. Nolan's mouth tightened. Mason asked me to schedule a private meeting. That's all. Why? I asked. He hesitated. He said there was a question about a refund. He wanted operations present. Because your signature was required, I said. The second signature, the gate Jenna, asking early would have forced you into it. Instead, she delayed, and you got time to choose the room and the window. Nolan's eyes flashed anger. I didn't choose a window. The system updates are scheduled. And you coordinate them, I said. Malden says you hate surprises. You like everything clean. His jaw worked. So I like schedules. That's my job. Your job is not to build a locked room, I said. Wolfe thinks you use the delay as the weapon. His eyes narrowed. Wolfe? Yes, I said. He's waiting in his brownstone with coffee and patience and a chair. If you want to explain why you were so quick to create that meeting and so careful to lock that room, you can do it there, or you can do it to Kramer, who will do it with cuffs. Nolan's shoulders rose and fell once. He looked toward Daniel Ridgway's door as if hoping the executive would step out and declare him innocent by authority. The door stayed closed. Finally, Nolan said, Fine, I'll talk. Good, I said. Not here. Wolfe's office is better for truth. He gave me a look that was half resentment, half calculation. You think you've got me? I think you're involved, I said. Wolfe thinks you timed the truth so it could be killed. He swallowed, and for the first time I saw something like fear flicker, not fear of police, but fear of exposure. The kind that makes a man schedule a private meeting instead of letting a question become public. I escorted him down, Because that is what you do with men who suddenly decide to cooperate. You keep them from changing their minds between floors. Back at West 35th Street, the brownstone looked as steady as ever, like a quiet judge waiting for the noisy parties to arrive. Inside, the warmth hit you first, then the civilized smell from Fritz's kitchen. Wolfe was in his office, seated, as if he had been born there. His orchids would be tended on schedule regardless of homicide, because Wolfe believes in maintaining what can be maintained. When Nolan Reed entered Wolfe's office, the room changed. Nolan tried to bring his executive posture with him, but Wolfe's office does not care about posture. It cares about truth. Wolfe regarded Nolan over his glasses. "Mr. Reed." Nolan nodded stiffly. "Mr. Wolfe." Wolfe's voice was calm. "Timing determines truth, Mr. Reed. You timed the truth so it could be killed. We will now discuss why you believed you had the right." Nolan's throat worked. He glanced once at me, as if checking whether I would rescue him from Wolfe's gaze. I did not. Wolfe leaned back slightly, hands folded, kingly and methodical. "We begin," he said, with a question delayed, "and we end with a man dead. The interval between is your work." And in that moment, with the brownstone quiet around us and the city outside rushing blindly on, I knew the case had shifted. We were no longer chasing an unknown service worker with an envelope. We were looking at the man who knew the locks, the schedules, and the safest 19 minutes in an office tower. Wolfe had reopened the late question. Now he was going to close the answer. Chapter 5. Delay becomes the weapon. If you have never seen Nero Wolfe refuse a simple conclusion, you have missed one of the more stubborn pleasures of life. Most men, presented with a corpse and an obvious suspect, will clap their hands, announce victory, and go home to dinner. Wolfe will do the opposite. He will insist that dinner be delayed until the facts are properly chewed. Nolan Reed sat in the red leather chair in Wolfe's office and tried to appear like a man participating voluntarily in an intelligent discussion. It was not a good performance. Nolan was built for corridors, schedules, and polite intimidation. Wolfe's office is a place where intimidation dies of loneliness. Inspector Kramer stood near the door because he likes doors when he is angry. He had brought Sergeant Stebbins, who hovered with a folder. Jenna Cross was not present, which was wise. Daniel Ridgway was not present either, which was cowardly. In the room there were only Wolfe, Nolan, Kramer, Stebbins, and me, plus the brownstone's quiet, which Wolfe uses like a tool. Wolfe began with the same calm he uses for orchids and murder. "Mr. Reed, you will not be treated as either guilty or innocent until the books speak." Nolan's eyes narrowed. "The books. This is about accounting." He set the lock. He scheduled the meeting. The camera gap happens. Mason ends up dead. Wolfe looked at him. "Inspector, you have opportunity and mechanism. You do not yet have the full truth. Do not rush to hang a man when you have not yet determined whom he was hanging." Kramer's face reddened. "Watch it." Wolfe's tone stayed even. "I am watching it. You should also." He turned to me. "Mr. Goodwin, you will now make the books speak." That was my cue. I had already pulled what I could from Ridgway's refund records because Wolfe had ordered me to, and because when Wolfe asks for numbers, he does not accept excuses. Ridgway's people had given us access under Kramer's pressure, and I had spent the morning swimming through transactions until my eyes felt like they needed a ledger of their own. I sat at my desk, opened my folder, and spoke plainly. "Where fund records show Mason Klein did approve suspicious refunds," I said. "Not one, several, same pattern. Vendor labels change between surface report and internal correction logs. Brightwell Solutions on the surface, North Dock Services in corrected entries, amounts under the threshold that triggers automatic review, except for one, which is the one Jenna noticed. Her question had teeth." Nolan's jaw tightened. "That's Mason. He handled finance." Wolfe lifted a hand slightly. "Do not be eager to assign all sin to the dead. Continue, Mr. Goodwin." "I did. The money trail does not end at Brightwell or North Dock. It flows into a shell account. That shell account is tied to Nolan Reed's cousin." Kramer's head snapped toward Nolan, cousin. Nolan's face went pale, then flushed. That's ridiculous. It's not, I said, and slid a printout across to Wolfe, then to Kramer. Account name is Ridgeway Consulting Services, registered to an address that matches Nolan's cousin, Evan Reed. Same last name, same address. History, same bank branch. Payments from the refund pool route there in batches. Stebbins leaned in, eyes wide, and Kramer's mouth tightened in the particular way it does when a case stops being easy and starts being satisfying. Wolfe's gaze stayed on Nolan. So, 2 hands in one pocket. Nolan's voice rose. Sharp. You can't prove that I touched any of that money. Wolfe's tone remained mild. You can prove nothing by shouting. Kramer growled. We can prove enough to charge conspiracy and fraud. Wolfe did not acknowledge the growl. He never does when Kramer behaves like a dog. He prefers Kramer when he behaves like a policeman. Wolfe turned slightly in his chair and spoke as if delivering a conclusion to himself. Mr. Klein and Mr. Reed were partners until Miss Cross's question threatened to expose their partnership. Nolan's eyes narrowed. Number Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Yes, the structure is now clear. Mr. Klein approved refunds. Mr. Reed ensured the operational gate, the second signature, and the facility control. Funds moved into a shell account tied to Mr. Reed's family. This was not a solitary theft, it was coordinated. Kramer snapped. Then why kill Klein? He was your man. Wolfe looked at him as if the question were obvious. Because partners become liabilities when one of them becomes frightened. Nolan's hands tightened on the chair arms. Mason was dead weight. He panicked. Wolfe nodded slightly. Exactly, panic is infectious. A delayed question can make it fatal. He looked at Nolan. You relied on paperwork camouflage. First, weak noise, routine adjustments. Miss Cross delayed, which benefited you. Then she asked at 11:30, and the timing changed. Audits were resuming. The holiday fog was lifting. Routine noise was fading. Your camouflage became thin. Nolan swallowed. His eyes flicked to the floor. Not guilt yet, but calculation. Wolfe continued, voice steady. You could not rely on paper anymore. So you used time as a weapon. A meeting, a camera gap, and a locked door. Kramer muttered. That's the murder. Wolfe's eyes flashed. That is the method we require intent, I said. We may have it. Wolfe's gaze shifted to me. Explain. I reached into my folder and removed an evidence sleeve. Inside was the thin envelope the receptionist had mentioned, the one seen passing the conference room at 2:10. Kramer's men had found it in a waste receptacle near the executive suite, discarded in haste. The envelope had no logo, only a typed name. Mason Klein. Inside was a document. I held it up so everyone could see the heading Resignation. It was already typed, formatted, complete. It had a date line. It had language that sounded like corporate humility and legal protection. It was ready for a signature, I said. This envelope was delivered at 2:10. Inside is a resignation draft for Mason, already typed, ready to be signed. Nolan's face tightened. That proves nothing. It proves a plan, I said. No one types a resignation letter for you out of kindness. Someone wanted Mason to sign it in that conference room. Wolfe nodded slowly. A forced signature. Like a ledger sign, off the pattern repeats. Nolan snapped. Mason was going to resign anyway. Wolfe's eyes were cold. Then he would have typed it himself. Kramer leaned forward, voice hard. You sent that envelope. Nolan's jaw clenched. I don't deliver mail. No, I said. You oversee facility access. You know who can walk a corridor with an envelope and not be noticed. A service worker. Nolan's eyes flicked, quick, the way they did when he realized my words had found the right joint in his armor. Wolfe spoke softly, and that softness was worse than shouting. Mr. Reed, you intended to force Mr. Klein to sign, thereby making him the scapegoat for the refund scheme. If he signed, you could claim he acted alone and resigned to avoid scrutiny. If he refused, you could silence him permanently. Nolan's voice rose. That's insane. Wolfe's gaze did not waver. It is practical, and you are a practical man. Delay gave you the chance to choose violence instead of negotiation. Kramer's fist tightened. You hear that? He's done. Wolfe held up a hand. Not yet. We will not convict by outrage. Nolan's breathing was shallow now. His eyes flicked toward the door, toward Kramer's bulk, toward the window, as if searching for a schedule that could rescue him. There was no schedule in Wolfe's office. There is only Wolfe. Wolfe leaned back slightly. Mr. Reed, we will now address the final point. You did not merely arrange a meeting, you arranged the safest 19 minutes in the building. Nolan's face hardened. The camera update was scheduled. And you knew precisely when it would occur, Wolfe replied. You knew which feeds would be unavailable. You knew privacy mode would prevent interruption. You knew Mr. Klein would enter at 1:56 because you placed the meeting there. You knew Miss Cross's question had triggered an emergency in your mind, not because you feared correction, but because you feared exposure. Nolan's throat worked. Mason was sloppy. Wolfe nodded. Yes, and sloppiness was tolerable until Miss Cross asked. Delay made you comfortable, then it made you desperate. Kramer stepped forward. Wolfe, I'm arresting him. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. You may arrest him for fraud and conspiracy now. You may arrest him for murder when you can place him in the room with the weapon. Kramer glared. He set the lock. Wolfe's eyes were cold. Setting a lock is not striking a blow. It is enabling it. Nolan's shoulders sagged a fraction, and I saw it then. Wolfe was right. Nolan might be the architect, but he might not be the hand. Mason Klein was dead, and someone had delivered the blow. Nolan's cousin's shell account tied him to fraud. The resignation letter tied him to coercion. The lock tied him to opportunity. But the exact act of murder still needed a clear path. Wolfe's tone softened slightly, not with sympathy but with method. Mr. Reed, you will tell us who delivered the blow, and you will do it now, while you still imagine you have choices. Nolan stared at Wolfe, and for a moment the room was silent enough to hear the city's distant noise through the windows. Then Nolan spoke, but not with confession. With anger. Anger is often the last defense of a man whose timing has failed. You think you're clever, he said. Sitting here in your warm house, you think you can see everything. Wolfe's eyes were steady. I see enough. Nolan's mouth twisted. Mason was going to ruin everything. He panicked. He wanted out. He wanted to blame me. He said he had messages. He said he would throw me under the bus. Then she asked him, and he knew he was exposed. Wolfe nodded once. So you prepared the resignation. Nolan's eyes flashed. I prepared a solution. Kramer snapped. And the solution was murder. Nolan's jaw clenched. The solution was containment. Wolfe's voice was soft. Containment requires force. Nolan's gaze flicked toward me, then away, and his hands tightened again. Wolfe looked at me. Mr. Goodwin, we will need the last piece. The precise sequence inside the conference room, the method of the blow, the manner of exit. The lock explains entry and interruption, not the strike itself. I nodded. We find who went in during the gap. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Yes, the service worker with the envelope is one candidate. Identify him. Identify who could carry a heavy object without appearing to. Identify who benefits from Mr. Klein's death more than Mr. Reed does. Nolan laughed, bitter. Nobody benefits. This is a disaster. Wolfe's expression remained calm. Disasters are often miscalculations. You miscalculated the effect of a delayed question. He leaned back and spoke the line with the quiet certainty that makes people afraid. Delay, Wolfe said, gave you the chance to choose violence instead of negotiation. Kramer's face was hard, but he held back, because even Kramer will occasionally admit that Wolfe's patience produces better arrests than Kramer's temper. Stebbins shifted, eager, and Wolfe's office settled into that attentive quiet again. The quiet that comes when a net has been cast, and the fish is not yet fully in it. Outside, January kept its grey inside. The case had moved beyond locked room trickery into the oldest motive of all, which is not money but fear of losing it. And the question that waited had finally become what it always was. A Weapon, Chapter 6. The answer prepared in advance. If you want to know how a man feels about a question, do not watch his face. Watch his hands. Faces have been trained by mirrors and bosses and bad marriages. Hands have been trained only by habit. That afternoon in Wolfe's office, Nolan Reed's hands were the best evidence in the room. The brownstone on West 35th Street was doing what it always does when violence tries to borrow its dignity. It remained dignified anyway. Fritz moved quietly through the hall. Fritz was in the kitchen, proving that good food is not a luxury but a requirement. And upstairs Wolfe's orchids were receiving their measured portion of heat and light, as if they too despised haste. Wolfe sat in his chair behind the desk, large, composed, and certain that the world's disorder was a temporary condition that would yield to method. Inspector Kramer stood near the door, bristling. Sergeant Stebbins had his folder and his eager eyes. Nolan Reed sat in the red leather chair and tried to behave like a man who had merely wandered in to discuss building procedures. Wolfe regarded Nolan for a moment, then spoke to Kramer in a tone that sounded like a request, but functioned like a command. "Inspector, you will announce that Miss Cross's original draft email has been recovered in full, with a timestamp earlier than previously believed." Kramer's eyebrows jumped. "Recovered in full, earlier than believed. That's a lie." "It is a pressure instrument," Wolfe said. "Use it." Kramer's face reddened. "I don't like lying." Wolfe's eyes were calm. "You like unsolved murders less." Stebbins shifted, excited. He enjoys traps the way some men enjoy sporting events. They both involve rules and the prospect of someone losing in public. Kramer glowered at Wolfe, then at me, then at Nolan, as if deciding which of us deserved his irritation most. Finally he spoke, loud enough to make it official. "We recovered Jenna Cross's draft email, full-body original timestamp. It was drafted earlier than you told us, and it was saved on the server. Earlier means more people had time to see it." Nolan Reed's posture did not change. His face remained a controlled mask of annoyance. His voice came out steady. "That's impossible." Wolfe's eyes did not move from Nolan's hands. Mine didn't either. Nolan's hands were on the chair arms, fingers relaxed, the picture of a man who has mastered his own pulse. Kramer went on. "We also have the server trail. If you're worried about what that email says, you should be." Nolan's lips pressed together. "I am not worried," Wolfe spoke, mild. "Then you will not object to our examination of it." Nolan's gaze snapped toward Wolfe. "I demand to see it." The room felt a degree colder, not because a window was open, but because a man had just revealed his true priority. Innocent people do not demand evidence. They ask for explanations. Guilty people demand evidence so they can control it. Wolfe lifted his brows slightly. "Why?" Nolan's voice sharpened. "Because you're accusing me of monitoring an employee's email. If you have a so-called recovered message, I want to see what you claim it contains. I want to know what you're using to smear me." He said smear, with the conviction of a man who has never encountered clean facts. Kramer snorted. "And you want to seize her laptop too, right?" Nolan answered too fast. "Yes. That laptop could have been used to alter the draft. We should preserve it." Wolfe's eyes stayed on Nolan's hands. Nolan's fingers were still controlled, still steady, still trying to look like they belonged to a man running operations and not a man running fear. Then Kramer said the words Wolfe had arranged. "Earlier time stamp," Kramer said. "Earlier than last week, earlier than you would like." Nolan's fingers twitched. It was small, a quick, involuntary jerk of the index finger on his right hand, like a wire under the skin had been plucked. Then the hand relaxed again, pretending nothing had happened. Wolfe's gaze flicked to mine for an instant. It was the look he gives when a trap springs cleanly. I said lightly, because lightness keeps men from realizing how badly they have slipped. "Nolan, you'll strain something if you keep your nerves that tight." His eyes flashed. "I'm fine." "Sure you are," I said. "Your finger just voted otherwise." Kramer looked at Nolan's hands as if seeing them for the first time. Stebbins leaned forward, wide-eyed, the way a hound leans when it catches scent. Wolfe spoke softly. "Mr. Reed, You have just demonstrated that the time-stamp matters to you. That is curious. Timestamps are trivial to the innocent. Nolan's jaw tightened. This is nonsense. It is observation, Wolfe replied. Do not confuse the two. Wolfe turned his head slightly toward the door. Mr. Ramsey, Alec Ramsey, Ridgway's it man, had been waiting in the hall with the expression of someone hoping technology could solve human beings. He entered carrying a binder and a nervous swallow. Yes, sir, Ramsey said. Wolfe's voice was calm. Tell us about the access attempt at 6:18 a.m. Ramsey blinked. 6:18. Kramer jerked his head. That's what you found. Ramsey nodded quickly, grateful for direction. Yes. We reviewed employee account access logs related to Jenna Cross. There was an attempted access to her account at 6:18 a.m. the day after she drafted her email. The attempt used administrative credentials associated with Nolan Reed's operations device. It was blocked because it was a sensitive mailbox. The air in the office changed. It always does when a technical fact lands. Technical facts are stubborn. They don't blush. They don't bargain. They just sit there and refuse to be softened by tone. Nolan's face went pale, then hardened. That's a mistake. Ramsey shook his head. It's not. The device signature is clear. The attempt came from your admin tablet. Nolan snapped. I have staff. My device is used in facilities. Wolfe nodded slightly. Indeed, you have staff. And yet your credential traveled to Miss Cross's mailbox at dawn. That suggests your interest was personal. Kramer's voice was hard. So you were monitoring the question before she asked it out loud? Nolan's mouth opened, then closed. He tried for indignation and produced only strain. Wolfe's tone was almost gentle, which is when he is most dangerous. He did not wait for the question. He prepared for it because he feared it. Nolan forced a laugh. Your twisting operations checks accounts for compliance. Wolfe's eyes were cold. Operations does not check a clerk's draft email at 6:18 a.m., I said. Most people at 6:18 are checking coffee, not clerks. Stebbins made a small sound that might have been a suppressed grin. Kramer shot him a look, and the grin died. Wolfe continued. Mr. Reed, the delayed question gave you time. Your attempt to access Miss Cross's account proves you used that time. You were not reacting. You were scouting. Nolan's hands tightened again, not twitching now, but clenching. The way a man grips a rail when the train begins to shake. Kramer shifted his weight. All right, now we search his office. Nolan's head snapped up. You can't. Kramer's eyes were flat. Try me. Wolfe lifted a hand, and Kramer halted, annoyed but obedient. It is a peculiar sight, Kramer obeying anyone, but Wolfe has that effect because Wolfe does not argue. He simply occupies the center of a room until others find themselves orbiting him. Inspector, Wolfe said, do it, but do it efficiently. We need particular items. Mr. Reed is a schedule man. He will keep schedules. Kramer grunted. We'll find them. They found them quickly. Stebbins and two men returned from Ridgway with a bag and a folder, and they looked pleased with themselves, which means they had found something that didn't require imagination. Stebbins laid the items on Wolfe's desk carefully, as if the desk were evidence too. Printed schedule. Stebbins said, Camera update windows. It was a stack of printed pages, neatly clipped, labeled by date and time. The windows were highlighted. Not 1 or 2 weeks' worth, I said. That's not casual. Kramer's mouth tightened. That's planning. Wolfe did not touch the pages. He looked at them with the disdain of a man regarding cheap flowers. A murderer who relies on systems must study systems, Stebbins added. Also this. He produced a small tool, not much larger than a pocket flashlight, with a port adapter and a small screen. Door programming tool, Stebbins said, used to trigger privacy locks remotely. Facilities confirmed. Nolan's face tightened, as if someone had pulled a cord behind it. That's a standard tool, Kramer snapped. Standard for facility staff, not for an operations coordinator who claims he only schedules meetings. Nolan's voice rose. I oversee facility coordination. I'm authorized. Wolfe nodded. Authorized to manage locks, not authorized to arrange a locked room murder. Nolan's shoulders rose and fell. He tried to regain control with language, the way a man tries to stop a leak by explaining water. You can't prove I used that tool on that door, Nolan insisted. You can't prove I was in that conference room. You can't prove I struck Mason. Wolfe's eyes remained calm. You are correct on one point. We cannot yet prove the manner of your entry and exit. That is now the final piece, Kramer said. We got enough to hold him. You have enough to hold him on fraud and conspiracy, Wolfe said. I want enough to close the murder with reason alone. Kramer's face reddened. Reason alone, always with the speeches. Wolfe's gaze turned colder. Inspector, if you prefer to solve murder by enthusiasm, you may leave. Kramer did not leave. He grunted and stayed where he was. I said, all right, final piece. How do you get in and out of a locked conference room unseen? Wolfe nodded slightly. Yes, the lock was set to privacy mode. The camera gap hides corridor activity. But a door does not lock itself after a man is struck. Someone either remained inside until the room was found, which seems unlikely, or exited in a manner not captured by the corridor camera. Nolan's eyes flicked toward the window. Then away. That was not a random glance, it was a glance at options. Wolfe noticed it too, he said. Mr. Reed, do not look toward salvation. Look toward the facts. Nolan's jaw clenched. This is harassment. Wolfe's voice was calm. It is method. He turned to Ramsey. Mr. Ramsey, does Ridgeway Tower have any alternate access between conference room 21C and adjacent service areas? Ramsey blinked. Alternate access. Service doors, Wolfe said. Connecting panels. Maintenance corridors. Anything not captured by the public corridor camera. Ramsey swallowed and glanced at Kramer, who glowered, then answered. There is a service corridor behind the conference rooms for HVAC access and cable runs. It's supposed to be locked. Kramer's head snapped. Behind the rooms. Ramsey nodded. Yes, facilities uses it. It connects to the freight elevator area. Wolfe's eyes were steady. And who has access? Ramsey hesitated. Facilities. Security supervisor. Operations coordinator has access for emergency coordination. Kramer's stare drilled into Nolan. You. Nolan's face stayed hard, but I saw the small sheen of sweat at his temple. Wolfe spoke, quietly triumphant. So, he could enter through the corridor during the camera gap, deliver the envelope to create a pretext, and then exit through the service corridor behind the room, unseen by the public corridor camera. The lock, already set to privacy mode, would preserve the illusion of a sealed scene. Kramer growled. We need proof. Wolfe nodded. We will obtain it, I said. How? Wolfe's eyes moved to the printed schedule pages, then to the door tool, then to Nolan's hands. Mr. Goodwin, you will go to Ridgeway Tower and inspect the service corridor. You will determine whether the conference room has a concealed service access point. You will also determine whether any door sensors, access logs, or motion detectors recorded entry there during the camera gap. Kramer said. We can do that. Wolfe looked at him. You will, and you will do it competently, which requires Mr. Goodwin to tell you what to look for. Kramer's face tightened, but he did not argue. Wolfe had the case by the throat now, and even Kramer likes it when a case stops wriggling. Nolan spoke, voice clipped. This is a fantasy. You're building a tunnel because you want one. Wolfe's gaze settled on him like weight. Number the building already has a tunnel. You counted on us not noticing it. That is why you printed schedules and carried a programming tool. You do not prepare such instruments unless you intend to use them. Nolan's hands clenched again. This time there was no twitch. There was something else. Something uglier. Resignation, perhaps, mixed with anger at having been seen. Wolfe leaned back slightly, satisfied but not finished. Mr. Reed, you prepared the answer in advance. You monitored the question at dawn. You selected a maintenance window. You secured a room. You drafted a resignation letter to force a signature. You did not negotiate, you arranged. He paused, letting the structure settle. Now, Wolfe said, we will find the path you used. When we do, the locked room will be locked no longer. I stood, already feeling the city's cold, waiting outside the brownstone. All right, I'll go find the service corridor and see whether it holds a footprint. Wolfe's eyes stayed on Nolan. Do so, Mr. Goodwin. And remember, the question was delayed. Therefore, the answer was prepared. As I reached for my coat, I glanced once at Wolfe's desk, at the neat stack of printed camera windows and the small door tool, and I thought about Jenna Cross sitting at her desk with an unsent email draft, believing delay was safety. Midnight had nothing to do with this case. But time still did. Time was the weapon, and someone had sharpened it long before the question was ever asked aloud. Chapter 7. Wolfe forces the timeline to speak. If you want to watch a man discover that time has turned against him, put him in Nero Wolfe's office and let the clock sit on the mantel like a judge. Wolfe does not need props, but he enjoys the irony when a murderer who trusted schedules finds himself trapped by one. That evening the brownstone was at its most deceptively civilized. The lamps were lit to the proper level, not bright enough to glare and not dim enough to suggest intimacy. The rugs looked innocent, the books behaved. From the kitchen came the steady, dignified aroma of Fritz's work, butter and stock and patience, the sort of smell that implies the universe is orderly even when it is not. Upstairs in the plant rooms, Wolfe's orchids were receiving their measured attention, their heat and humidity as strict as a bank vault, because Wolfe will permit murder to disrupt many things, but not his routine. I was in the office arranging chairs. That may sound like a servant's task, which it is, but it is also one of Wolfe's more efficient instruments. The placement of chairs determines who feels in control and who feels exposed. Wolfe knows it. He rarely touches a chair, but he uses every one of them. Inspector Kramer arrived first, loud in the hall and damp at the shoulders, carrying his resentment like a briefcase. Sergeant Stebbins was with him, eager and burdened with folders. Kramer stopped just inside the doorway, glanced at the chairs, and scowled. You got a meeting, he said. Wolfe, seated behind his desk, did not look up from the paper he was reading. I have an assembly, Kramer snorted. Same thing. It is not, Wolfe said, and that was enough to establish that Kramer would be wrong on principle for the rest of the evening. Jenna Cross arrived next. I had arranged for her to come with a uniformed escort, not because Wolfe enjoys intimidation, but because Wolfe dislikes preventable risks. Jenna looked as if she had spent the day being examined by strangers and found wanting. She carried herself carefully, hands folded, eyes darting. When she saw Wolfe, she stiffened as if expecting rebuke. Wolfe gave her none. He nodded once, which in Wolfe's language is as close as a handshake. Miss Cross, Mr. Wolfe, she said, voice small. Sit, Wolfe instructed, and she sat, on the edge of the chair, as if she might need to flee quickly. The building security chief arrived third. His name was Victor Halstead, and he wore an expensive suit and a professional expression that suggested he believed crime was a matter of insufficient policy. He had the cautious eyes of a man who has spent his career assuring executives that nothing can happen, then watching it happen anyway. Halstead looked around Wolfe's office with a faint disapproval, as if our brownstone should have had more glass. Then he noticed Wolfe's stare and decided the brownstone was adequate. Mr. Wolfe, Halstead said. Inspector, Kramer grunted. Finally Nolan Reed arrived, escorted by two of Kramer's men. Nolan's posture was still good, but not as good as he thought. He tried to bring the Ridgeway Tower air of authority into Wolfe's office and found it did not fit through the door. He looked at Jenna Cross for an instant, eyes sharp, as if she were a nuisance that had grown teeth. Then his gaze settled on Wolfe, and he tried for calm. Mr. Wolfe, he said, I assume this is another attempt to bully me into confessing to something I did not do. Wolfe regarded him for a moment, the way he regards a flower that is failing to bloom properly. You assume incorrectly. I am not interested in confession. I am interested in coherence. Nolan's jaw tightened. Coherence. Wolfe nodded. Truth is coherent. Lies require constant adjustment. You are an adjustment man, Kramer muttered. That's nice. Let's get to it. Wolfe finally looked up fully, and the room quieted the way it always does when Wolfe chooses to occupy it with his full attention. We will begin, Wolfe said. With time, Mr. Halstead. You will listen carefully. You represent the building that permitted a murder to occur behind a lock and a camera update. That is an embarrassment. You may redeem yourself by cooperating. Halstead's face tightened, but he nodded, of course. Wolfe turned slightly toward Jenna. Miss Cross, you asked your supervisor, Mason Klein, a question yesterday morning. State the time. Jenna swallowed. 11:30, Wolfe nodded. 11:30 a.m. The question was asked face to face, not by email. Therefore, it created no immediate record, only fear. Nolan shifted barely. Wolfe's eyes moved to Kramer. Inspector the calls. Kramer opened a folder and read with the clipped tone of a man reciting facts he would rather not have needed. Mason Klein placed 2 calls to Nolan Reed, one at 11:34, duration 46 seconds, one at 11:38, duration 2 minutes. Those calls were deleted from Klein's work phone at 12:02, but recovered by it from carrier logs and device image. Wolfe nodded once. At 12:07, the calendar entry. Calendar, I answered, because I enjoyed seeing Halstead's confidence dented. The 2 p.m. meeting labeled Q appeared on Mason Klein's calendar at 12:07. It was created from Nolan Reed's admin device. Halstead's face shifted from disapproval to alarm. From Mr. Reed's device, Nolan said sharply. Mason asked me to schedule a private meeting. That is within my authority. Wolfe's voice stayed calm. Many things are within your authority that are not within your innocence. He looked at Halstead again. At 1:52, privacy mode was set on conference room 20, 1C using Mr. Reed's credential. That is a facility control. You know this, Mr. Halstead. Halstead's mouth tightened. Yes, privacy mode can be set by authorized personnel. Wolfe nodded. At 2:03, the corridor camera experienced a gap labeled System Update. During that gap, activity could occur without being recorded by that corridor feed. And at 3:05, security opened the door and found Klein dead. Wolfe lifted a hand slightly, arranging the facts as if they were cutlery. So the sequence is this. Question at 11:30 calls at 11:34 and 11:38. Meeting created at 12:07 privacy mode, set at 1:52. Camera gap begins at 2:03. Body found at 3:05. He looked at Nolan Reed. You are fond of schedules, Mr. Reed. Here is yours. Nolan's eyes narrowed. Those are just times. Times are not murder. Wolfe nodded. Correct. Times are not murder. Times are advantage. He leaned back slightly, and his voice took on that measured, deliberate tone that makes people stop thinking about excuses and start thinking about escape. The killer's advantage, Wolfe said, was control of interruption. A delayed question gave Mr. Reed the opportunity to decide when the confrontation would occur. He selected a time when the building would be busy enough to be careless, and the corridor would be blind long enough to be useful. He ensured privacy mode would prevent a casual entry. He intended that no one would interrupt. Halstead's face darkened. Our systems were scheduled. Wolfe looked at him as if Halstead had said the weather was scheduled. Systems may be scheduled. Their exploitation is chosen, Nolan said, voice tight. You keep saying, he. You assume I am the killer. Wolfe's eyes were cold. I assume nothing. I conclude where evidence leads. You have been leading us by the hand, and you have not noticed it. Kramer snapped. We got more. Wolfe glanced at him. Yes, provide it. Kramer nodded at Stebbins, and Stebbins practically bounced as he stepped forward. He had been waiting for his moment the way a boy waits to show his report card. Stebbins said. The privacy lock was triggered again, not just set earlier at 2:02 p.m. A remote trigger signal hit the lock from a facility tool. 1 minute before the camera update gap, we matched the tool's signature to Nolan Reed's door programming device. Halstead's eyes widened. Remote trigger at 2:02. Kramer growled, 1 minute before the cameras go blind. That's not routine. Nolan's face flushed. That tool is standard. It could have been used by facilities. Wolfe's voice was mild. It could, if your tool were not found in your office. Nolan's mouth tightened. Wolfe looked at me. Mr. Goodwin, your contribution. I had been waiting because my contribution was unpleasant, and I like unpleasant things best when I can deliver them neatly. I took an evidence photo from my folder and set it on Wolfe's desk, then angled it so the others could see. The coffee cup in the conference room, I said. The one spilled on the carpet. Kramer's lab ran it. There was a sedative trace. Halstead blinked. Sedative. Jenna's hand flew to her mouth. Nolan's eyes sharpened. That is impossible. Kramer's voice was flat. Not impossible, confirmed. I continued. Not enough to kill, enough to slow, enough to dull reaction and make a man compliant or at least less quick. If Mason took a few sips before he realized what the meeting was, he would become easier to handle. Nolan said sharply, You are implying I drugged him. I am implying someone wanted him slowed. I said, You like controlled environments. That includes a controlled bloodstream. Wolfe's eyes stayed on Nolan. This is consistent with coercion. An envelope delivered at 2:10 contained a resignation letter already typed, ready to be signed. That implies an intention to force a signature. A sedative would help. Nolan's voice rose, strained. Mason could have been drinking coffee anywhere. Someone could have tampered with it before he brought it in. Wolfe nodded. Yes, someone could. Someone with access to the corridor, to the room, and to the schedule. Halstead's face tightened. If this is true, it means someone exploited our maintenance window and our privacy setting. Wolfe's eyes flicked to him. Mr. Halstead, that is what we have been saying in different words. Your building became a tool, Kramer said. And this guy used it. Nolan's jaw clenched. I did not kill Mason Klein. Wolfe inclined his head slightly. That is still possible, but you certainly intended to coerce him. The resignation draft is evidence of that. The sedative is evidence of that. The remote trigger at 2:02 is evidence of that. He paused, and the room grew quiet, as if everyone was waiting for Wolfe to say the next number. Wolfe's voice was calm. Let us consider the likely sequence inside that conference room. Mr. Klein enters at 1:50. 6 privacy mode is already set, and it is reinforced at 2:02. He has coffee, perhaps brought with him, perhaps already in the room. He sips. He slows. At 2:10, an envelope passes the door. It contains a resignation letter, typed and ready. Mr. Klein is instructed to sign. Jenna's eyes were wide, wet. Why would he sign? Wolfe looked at her, and his tone was almost patient. Because he was threatened. Because he was a partner who had become a liability. Because he may have believed resignation would spare him prosecution or humiliation, or because he was promised something. People sign when they believe the alternative is worse. Nolan's face hardened. This is storytelling. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. Number, this is reconstruction. Storytelling would be prettier. He continued. Mr. Klein resists. He may protest. He may attempt to leave. But his phone is outside the room. Kramer spoke, and his voice carried a rough satisfaction. Because Kramer loves any fact that looks like a trap sprung. Phone was found outside the room in the corridor, like it fell out of his pocket. Wolfe nodded. Or like it was placed there. Nolan snapped. He stepped out. He could have stepped out to take a call, then returned. Wolfe's gaze was cold. A plausible claim, except for the fact that the corridor camera, when functioning, shows no such movement after 1:56, and the phone's position was too neat. It suggested he had been in the corridor. It suggested he had agency. It suggested he was not confined. Halstead swallowed. It was staged. Wolfe's voice was steady. Yes. It was staged to support the myth that he locked himself in. If his phone is outside, One may imagine he stepped out, returned, locked the door, and then, by some miracle, died alone. It is a childish suggestion, but childish suggestions are common when criminals are hurried. Nolan's hands clenched, then released, then clenched again. Wolfe looked at him. "Mr. Reed, you have insisted that Mr. Klein locked himself in. You have implied he acted alone, and yet your facility tool triggered the lock at 2:02. That is not self-locking. That is external control." Nolan's voice rose. "You cannot prove I triggered it." Kramer's face was hard. "We can. Tool signature, access log, location ping. Your device talked to that lock." Nolan looked at Kramer with contempt. "Your tech is not perfect," Wolfe spoke softly. "It is sufficiently perfect to destroy your comfort." He turned then, not to Nolan, but to Jenna Cross. His tone changed slightly, not kind but exact. "Wolfe is never sentimental, yet he is occasionally precise in a way that resembles kindness." "Miss Cross," Wolfe said, "you will listen carefully. You delayed your question. You believed delay was safety. You believed paper would absorb risk. But delay is not neutral." Jenna's eyes filled. "I know." Wolfe's voice remained calm. "If you had asked last week, the answer would have been paperwork. It would have been a second signature request, a correction, a cover story, perhaps even a quiet adjustment to protect the scheme. There would have been time for negotiation. Today, the answer was murder." Jenna's breath hitched. She shook her head as if trying to shake off the idea that her caution had become a weapon for someone else. Wolfe went on, and his voice was firm now. "Your delay allowed Mr. Reed to choose the battlefield. He did not face a question in a public thread where others could see. He faced it in a private room at a time he selected, with a camera blinded and a lock controlled. That is what delay purchased." Nolan snapped. "She is not responsible." Wolfe's gaze swung back to Nolan, like a door closing. "Correct, she is not. You are." Halstead shifted, uncomfortable. "Mr. Wolfe, this is all very dramatic, but you still have not proven how he entered and left unseen." Wolfe nodded. "Yes, that is the remaining puzzle, and it is not difficult." I felt the room tighten. Wolfe had that look, the one that means he has stopped gathering and begun concluding. Wolfe addressed Halstead. "Your conference rooms are backed by a service corridor. Your IT representative has acknowledged it. That corridor connects to the freight elevator area. It is not covered by the public corridor camera that experienced an update gap." Halstead's face went taut. "The service corridor is restricted." Wolfe nodded. "Restricted is not sealed. Restricted merely means fewer people know it exists," Kramer added. "We checked the service corridor door logs after Goodwin prompted it. There was access at 2:01 by Nolan's credential, and again at 2:23, right when the camera comes back, in and out." Halstead stared, as if the words had struck him. "Those logs exist." Kramer's voice was hard. "They do. Your building keeps them. It just doesn't show them on the lobby screens." Nolan's face had gone pale again. His mouth opened, then closed. His hands were still now, not steady with control, but still with the realization that movement would be visible. Wolfe's voice was calm, almost gentle, which meant he was about to be cruel to Nolan's hopes. "So, Mr. Reed enters through the service corridor at 2:01, triggers the privacy lock at 2:02, and allows the corridor camera to go blind at 2:03. Within that window, he has privacy. He may coerce. He may strike. He then exits through the service corridor before the corridor camera resumes at 2:22, or after it resumes, but without appearing in the public corridor." Nolan's voice was hoarse. "This is still speculation." Wolfe shook his head. It is the only coherent explanation that accounts for your lock control, your schedule knowledge, your early monitoring of Miss Cross's email, the sedative trace, the resignation letter, and the staging of the phone." He leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Reed, you are a man who believes that if he controls the calendar, he controls reality. You made a timeline. You lived inside it. Now the timeline is the witness. Nolan stared at Wolfe, and I watched the moment he understood what Wolfe meant. It was not guilt that appeared first. It was comprehension, which is worse. Guilt can be denied. Comprehension cannot. Wolfe did not let the silence grow too long, because Wolfe knows that silence is useful only when it causes cracks. He spoke again, voice low and exact. When you demanded to see the recovered email, you revealed your fear of timestamps. When you attempted to access Miss Cross's account at dawn, you revealed you were watching the question before it was asked aloud. When you printed camera update windows, you revealed you prepared a stage. When you carried a door programming tool, you revealed you prepared a sealed room. Wolfe's eyes stayed on Nolan. You did not wait for events, you manufactured them. Kramer's hands were clenched. All right, that's it. We got him. Wolfe raised a hand slightly. Inspector, you will arrest him when you choose, but I will finish my statement. Kramer scowled, but he waited. Even Kramer, when Wolfe is this close to closing a case, will wait because he wants the satisfaction too. Wolfe turned to Jenna Cross once more. Miss Cross, you will remember this, and it may spare you later. Fear delays questions. Delay gives criminals time. Time gives criminals choice. Choice gives criminals violence. Jenna nodded, tears finally slipping. She wiped them with a trembling hand, ashamed of them, then let them be, which I admired. Wolfe returned his gaze to Nolan Reed. Mr. Reed, you now understand the trap. You believed the building and its schedules would protect you. You believed the camera gap would erase you. You believed the lock would seal you away from consequence. But you cannot lock time, and you cannot erase the sequence you yourself created. Nolan's voice came out thin. You think the timeline is enough. Wolfe's tone was steady. It is more than enough. It is complete. Nolan's fingers twitched again, smaller than before, the last stubborn protest of a man who has lived by control and is now being controlled by facts. Wolfe leaned back, satisfied. The timeline speaks. It says you feared a question. It says you prepared an answer, and it says you arranged for that answer to be final. Kramer stepped forward then, no longer waiting. Nolan Reed, you're under arrest. Nolan did not fight. He sat there for a second, staring at the rug as if it might offer a hidden exit. Then he stood and allowed the cuffs, his face now blank, the way a man's face goes when he realizes his plan has been read aloud. As Kramer led Nolan out, Halstead looked as if he might resign on the spot, and Jenna looked as if she might never delay another question in her life. Wolfe remained seated behind his desk, calm as ever, as if arranging the downfall of a schedule-minded murderer were merely another form of pruning. When the door closed and the office regained its quiet, Wolfe looked at me. We have forced the timeline to speak, he said. Yes, I replied, and it spoke loud enough for even Halstead. Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly, which for him is amusement. Now we must ensure that the remainder of the truth is spoken in the proper place. In court, and in my office, when we complete the structure. I nodded, because I knew what was coming next. Chapter 8 would not be about whether Nolan planned it. That was settled. It would be about the final act, the blow itself, the way the lock and corridor and sedative and resignation converged into a death. But for now, Wolfe had done what he always does. He had taken a thing that people call chaotic and proved it was arranged, and he had used the murderer's favorite tool, time, to undo him. Outside, New York kept hurrying. Inside, the brownstone held steady. And in the corner of my mind, the only thing I could think was that a delayed question is never really delayed. It is simply given to someone else to use. Chapter 8. The weapon was waiting. Kramer left with Nolan Reed in cuffs, and for about 15 seconds the brownstone felt like it had been washed clean with quiet. The front door closed, the hallway absorbed the footfalls, and Fritz drifted in like the house itself had decided to resume its proper breathing. Wolfe remained in his chair behind the desk as if nothing in the world had changed, except the arrangement of facts. Jenna Cross stayed seated, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were pale. Victor Halstead, Ridgway's security chief, had the look of a man who had just discovered his expensive. Systems were only expensive, not smart. He kept glancing at the floor as if the rug might list his failures in small print. Wolfe regarded them for a moment, then spoke with the mild finality he uses when he is done with a portion of human drama. "Mr. Halstead, you may return to your tower and explain to your superiors that procedure is not the same as protection. Miss Cross, you may remain a moment. You have earned clarity." Halstead's mouth tightened. He started to say something, perhaps a defense of schedules, but thought better of it. He left. Jenna sat rigid, eyes fixed on Wolfe. I was standing by my desk, feeling the familiar aftertaste that comes when a case closes, relief, irritation, and the faint sense that a city full of strangers has been rearranged by one man who refuses to leave his house. Jenna's voice came out small. "Is it over?" Wolfe's eyes were steady. "It is over for you, in the sense that you are not culpable. It is not over for Mr. Reed, or for the institution that tolerated him." She swallowed. "I keep thinking if I had sent the email." Wolfe's tone was precise. "If you had sent the email last week, the answer would have been paper, a second signature request, a correction, an excuse, perhaps a quiet attempt to erase. Your delay did not create the crime. It created the conditions that made the criminal choose a particular method. That is a distinction you must accept." Jenna's eyes filled again, so my hesitation mattered. Wolfe nodded once. "Yes, but it did not absolve the murderer," I said gently, because a little gentleness is sometimes the only way to keep someone from turning their guilt into a private religion. "Jenna, you asked. That mattered too." She looked at me, then at Wolfe. He was watching me. Wolfe's mouth tightened. He was watching the question. That line hit her harder than anything else. Her shoulders slumped, and she looked suddenly very young. Wolfe leaned back slightly, as if granting her permission to breathe. "You may go. Mr. Goodwin will arrange for safe transport." He nodded, stood, and left with Fritz guiding her to the front. Fritz does not appear to care about crime, but he cares about people being treated decently in Wolfe's house, and that includes frightened clerks. When she was gone, Wolfe's office seemed larger. The case had already been decided by logic, and yet Wolfe was still watching it with that particular patience of his. He knows something most policemen forget. When you corner a man with a timeline, you do not always get his confession immediately. Sometimes you get it after the first wave of rage passes and the reality remains. I said, "You want him to talk." Wolfe's eyes lifted. "Confession is not necessary for conviction, but it is instructive. Also, it may clarify any remaining detail that a prosecutor will later misuse." "Like the exact moment he dropped the sedative," I said. Wolfe nodded. "And the exact manner of staging. The public corridor is one thing. The service corridor is another. And I would like to hear Mr. Reed's own description of his so-called containment." I snorted. "Containment? He should try a jar." Wolfe ignored that. "Inspector Kramer will bring him back." Kramer did bring him back, not because he enjoys being Wolfe's chauffeur, but because he enjoys solving cases cleanly, and Wolfe had handed him a case so neat, it made a policeman look competent. Kramer returned within the hour, the damp on his coat renewed and his expression sour. "I'm not running a taxi service," he announced as he entered. Wolfe did not look up. "And yet you are performing admirably." Kramer scowled, then jerked his head toward the doorway. Nolan Reed came in between two uniformed men, cuffs still on, face tight, eyes hollow. The posture was still there, but it was now a posture without belief. Kramer said, "You wanted him. You got him. Make it quick." Wolfe gestured mildly toward the chair. "Mr. Reed, sit." Nolan remained standing. "Why, you already made your speech." Wolfe's gaze was calm. "Sit, or I will conclude that you prefer discomfort to truth." Nolan's jaw tightened. Then he sat stiffly, as if the chair were contaminated. Kramer planted himself near the door again, arms crossed. Stebbins hovered behind him, notebook ready. I took my place at my desk because it is always useful to look as if you are merely a clerk, while watching a man decide whether to destroy himself further. Wolfe spoke softly. Mr. Reed, you have been charged. You will be prosecuted. Whether you are convicted will depend on the quality of evidence, which is already considerable. You may now either speak coherently or continue to attempt incoherence. Coherence is more dignified. Nolan's eyes flashed. Dignity coming from you. Wolfe's expression did not change. I possess it. You have misplaced it. Nolan leaned back, cuffs clinking faintly. You think you're so smart. Wolfe nodded slightly. Yes. That is one of Wolfe's more irritating habits. He will agree with an insult if it is accurate, and it disarms people because it removes the usual playground rules. Wolfe continued. We have established that you and Mason Klein ran a refund scheme. We have the suspicious approvals. We have the shell account tied to your cousin. We have your early access attempt to Miss Cross's mailbox. We have your printed schedule of camera update windows. We have your facility tool. We have the service corridor access. We have the sedative trace. We have the resignation draft. These are facts. Now state the sequence in your own words. Nolan stared at Wolfe, and I could see the conflict. Men like Nolan live by control. Confession is surrender, but he had already lost control, and sometimes the only control a man can salvage is the order in which he tells his own story. He spoke at last, voice low. It started as corrections. Wolfe's eyes stayed on him. Clarify. Nolan swallowed. First week back, everyone expects mistakes, refunds, credits, service adjustments. You can call anything a correction if you put it in the right bucket. Mason knew finance. I knew operations, facility, the approvals. We built it so it looked like cleanup, like the system catching up from December. Kramer grunted. Cover. Nolan's eyes flicked toward him, then away. Cover. Yes. First, weak mistakes, normal adjustments. People hear that, and they stop listening. Mason told them that. He was good at it. Wolfe's voice was calm, and North Dock. Nolan's jaw tightened. North Dock was the internal label. We used different payee names on the surface. Brightwell, others. North Dock never showed in reports executives read. It was in corrected entries only. That kept it from becoming a pattern anyone would spot quickly. I said, except Jenna. Nolan's eyes flashed. Except her. Wolfe nodded. Proceed. Nolan exhaled. Then she drafted the email. Wolfe's brows lifted slightly. You knew before she asked. Nolan's voice tightened. I watch risk. That's my job. Wolfe's tone stayed steady. Number, your job was theft. Your watchfulness was fear. Nolan's mouth twisted, but he did not deny it. I saw the draft hit the server metadata, not the content, just that she was writing, saving her subject line. It was enough. I tried to access it early, 6:18. I wanted to know what she had noticed, how much she understood. Kramer's face hardened. So you were stalking a clerk? Nolan's eyes flicked again. I was protecting myself. Wolfe's voice was mild. Self-protection is a common motive. It is not a defense. Nolan continued. She didn't send it. She waited. That helped us. It gave Mason time to keep smoothing. It gave me time to tighten things. We thought it would fade. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. But it did not. Nolan's shoulders rose and fell. She asked him, Face 2, Face 11:30, and Mason called you. Wolfe said. Nolan nodded. Twice. He was shaken. He said she had finally asked. He said she wasn't letting it go. He said audits were restarting, that the first weak fog was lifting. He panicked. Wolfe's tone stayed even. He threatened you. Nolan's jaw clenched. He hinted, he said. If this blows up, I'm not going down alone. He said maybe he should talk. Maybe he should confess. He talked about saving himself. Kramer's mouth tightened. So you decided to save yourself first. Nolan's eyes hardened. I decided to contain it. Wolfe's gaze was steady. By forcing him to sign a resignation. Nolan hesitated, then nodded. Yes, if Mason signed, I could say he acted alone. He resigned to avoid audit. It would buy me time. It would give me distance. Wolfe's voice remained calm. You intended to scapegoat your partner. Nolan's mouth twisted. He was already turning on me. Wolfe did not argue. He does not waste time debating moral symmetry with criminals. Nolan continued, voice low. I created the meeting 2 p.m. I labeled it Q because it would look like a quarterly review. Routine Mason would come. He always came to meetings. He thought he could control. I said. And you controlled the room. Nolan nodded. Privacy mode. Service corridor access. Camera update window. I had the schedule printed because I needed to know the blind spots. I didn't want interruptions, not for this. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So you drugged his coffee? Nolan's face tightened. I didn't want to fight him. I didn't want him shouting, running, calling someone. I needed him slow enough to listen. Sedative is a polite word for drugging, I said. Nolan's eyes flashed, then dulled. I slipped it in when I was in the service corridor. There's a utility access behind the conference rooms. You can reach the credenza area without going through the public corridor. Facilities does it all the time. Wolfe nodded slightly, satisfied with the confirmation. Nolan went on. I triggered the privacy lock at 2:02. 1 minute before the cameras updated. That gave me the room sealed and the corridor blind. Wolfe's voice was quiet. Then you demanded the signature. Nolan stared at the rug. I put the resignation in the envelope, had a maintenance guy deliver it as a routine drop. He didn't know what it was. He just carried it. I told Mason it was his way out. Sign, resign, take the blame, and I would make sure his severance was generous. Kramer made a low sound of disgust. Severance, you're selling murder like a benefits package. Nolan's jaw tightened. He didn't sign. Wolfe's gaze sharpened. He resisted. Nolan nodded once stiffly. He read it. He laughed. He said I was insane. He said he would go to Ridgeway himself. He said he had notes, messages. He said he'd confess and take me with him. He tried to stand. He was slow, but he was still Mason. He reached for the door. And his phone was outside, Wolfe said. Nolan's face tightened. I took it from him earlier. I placed it outside the room. I wanted it to look like he stepped out and came back. I wanted the idea that he was alone. Wolfe's voice remained calm. Staging. Nolan's hands clenched in his cuffs. He tried to leave anyway. Wolfe watched him, and you struck him. For a moment, Nolan did not speak. His throat worked. Then he said it. One blow, Nolan whispered. I grabbed the paperweight from the table. I hit him once. He went down. He didn't even have time to shout. Kramer's eyes were hard. You killed him. Nolan's voice turned brittle. I didn't plan to kill him. Wolfe's tone was quiet and merciless. You planned coercion with a sedative and a locked door. Do not pretend you planned gentleness. Nolan's shoulders sagged. He made it worse. He made it impossible. Wolfe's eyes were steady. You made it impossible when you chose theft. Nolan swallowed. After he fell, I wiped the obvious surfaces, left the chair tipped, spilled the coffee. I went out through the service corridor. The cameras came back. I was already gone. I let security find him later. Kramer stepped forward, voice flat. That's enough. Wolfe lifted a hand slightly. One more point, Inspector, Mr. Reed. Answer this. Why did the delayed question matter so much to you? Nolan's face tightened. Because timing. Wolfe nodded. Explain. Nolan stared down, then said, Last week, it would have been noise, holiday chaos. People were buried. We could have fixed it, moved it, blamed the system. But yesterday, audits were resuming. Everyone was awake again, and Mason was already cracking. If she asked then, it wasn't just a question, it was a fuse. Wolfe's voice was calm. So the weapon was waiting. Nolan looked up, eyes hollow. Yes. Kramer snapped his fingers at the uniforms. Take him. They hauled Nolan Reed up. He did not resist. He looked like a man who had spent his life managing schedules and now found himself scheduled for prison. When he was gone, Kramer remained a moment, staring at Wolfe as if trying to decide whether to thank him or swear at him. "You got what you wanted," Kramer said. Wolfe nodded. "You got what you needed," Kramer grunted. "Jenna is cleared." "Yes," Wolfe said, "but she will remember." Kramer left. The office quiet returned, but it was a different quiet now, not attentive, not tense. It was the quiet after a final note is played, when the room holds it for a moment before life resumes. I sat back and exhaled, feeling the case settle in my bones. Wolfe looked at me. "The case is concluded." "Neatly," I said. "For a locked room and a man who loved schedules." Wolfe's mouth tightened slightly. "It was never truly locked. It was merely managed." I nodded. "And time did the managing." Wolfe's gaze drifted briefly upward toward the stairs, toward the orchid rooms, as if reminding himself that controlled environments can be benign when they are not used to harm. Then he looked back at me, and his voice was quiet. "A question asked too late is still a question," Wolfe said. "But it is no longer protection, it becomes evidence." I let that sit, because when Wolfe produces a line like that, it deserves a moment of silence. Outside, New York would keep hurrying, and inside, Fritz would keep cooking, and upstairs, the orchids would keep blooming, as if humans were not ridiculous. I said, "Jenna will probably never delay another question." Wolfe's expression did not soften, but his tone carried a faint edge that might have been approval. "That would be wise." I stood stretching. "In January, seconds matter." Wolfe nodded. "Always." I glanced toward the window. The city lights were coming on, blinking through the gray. People would be going home, making dinner, telling themselves the day was ordinary. Somewhere downtown, Ridgeway Tower would keep functioning, busy and careless, as if murder were a temporary inconvenience. But I knew better, because I had watched a question turn into a weapon, simply because it was held too long. Midnight is not magic. The only magic is the way human beings convince themselves that waiting is harmless. Wolfe was right. Delay can kill.